Can I welcome you to today's oversight meeting? That's members, officers and members of the public watching on the webcast. Today's meeting is going to be the core issue of the relocation of staff in City Hall to a number of other different locations under a mayoral proposal. In accordance with government regulations, we're holding this meeting as a virtual basis with Assembly members and guests participating remotely. I will call on Assembly members to speak by name during the question and answer session. I will also introduce each guest as they join us for the number of items that we've got before us. Can I just remind participants to turn your mobile phones off and put them on silent? Can I ask the clerk to confirm the names of Assembly members who are virtually present at this meeting and any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Present and live on the call, we have Assembly Member Hall, Assembly Member Berry, Assembly Member Boff, Assembly Member Desai, Assembly Member McCartney, Assembly Member Pigeon, Assembly Member Prince, Assembly Member Sahota, Assembly Member Shaw, and yourself, Chair, Assembly Member Duval. And we've also received apologies from Assembly Member Whittle. Thank you very much for that.
Now, just before we begin the next item, I just need to make a statement concerning a number of inquiries that we've had from members of the public, members and journalists, and it relates to the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC. They published the outcome of their investigation into Boris Johnson and his relationship with Jennifer Akurey during his time as Mayor of London in May 2020. The IOPC's investigation looked at whether the former Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, broke the law. That is not the London Assembly's remit. The London Assembly is here to hold the Mayor to account under the GLA Act 1999 and has the powers to summons previous mayors for up to 8 years after they leave office. Now, I don't need to tell you the COVID-19 pandemic is still with us. The government and the Greater London Authority, both the Mayor and the Assembly's #1 priority is dealing with that pandemic and other issues that arise from it, including the work that's needed for the economic recovery of London's economy, transport city and our communities. The Assembly does not wish to distract from this work at this time. However, there are still questions that the London Assembly, as following the IOPC findings, the questions the London Assembly would like to focus on in particular is whether any governance lessons for the GLA can be learnt. Londoners deserve to have their politicians held to account, and that's exactly what the London Assembly will do when the time is right. So I just wanted to make that clear, that no one was rushing into this investigation at this difficult time, but equally, it's not going to happen any time soon. Rightly so, both government and ourselves need to focus on the key priority of tackling the pandemic. Now, if I can move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members? Can I also ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interest in specific items listed on the agenda? I take the nods from the Assembly members I can see as noting. Are there any declarations that members wish to make at this particular time? Okay, there are none. I'm moving on to the membership of the committee. Can we note the membership and chairing arrangements of this committee as listed on this agenda? Good, is that noted? Thank you. I'm now moving on to item 4, terms of reference and standing delegations. Can we note the terms of reference of this committee and standing delegations of authority as listed on the agenda? Thank you very much. I'm now moving to item 5, which is the minutes. Can I confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 17th of March 2020, the 7th of May 2020, the 20th of May 2020, to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you very much. Can I then need to just go to item 6, summary list of actions. Can you note the completed and outstanding closed actions arising from previous meetings of the GLA Oversight Committee, and in additional received the correspondence attached in reports, Appendix 1 to 3. Can we agree, note the, on item B, that's not, sorry, I've had an indication from Andrew Boff. Is it,
with regard to correspondence, Chair, I know that we've received correspondence from the Silvertown Tunnel campaign, and it strikes me that we've, as an assembly, we've spent a lot of time on other pieces of infrastructure. On the agenda is a letter from the concerning our investigation into the Garden Bridge. And it really strikes me that this is a major, Silvertown Tunnel is an absolutely major transport investment. And yet the Assembly has been, to be honest, over the years, relatively silent on it. And yet this is a hugely expensive £1.2 billion scheme. You know, the Garden Bridge, we spent time on the Garden Bridge, and that's about £163 million per kilometre. Crossrail, which we have also spent a lot of time investigating, was £155 million per kilometre. The Silvertown Tunnel is £857 million per kilometre, and we have remained virtually silent on it. I think it's time that this committee were to resolve that it would conduct an investigation into the Silvertown Tunnel, or at least commit to having discussions after this meeting in the way in which we can, as an assembly, speak for those Londoners who are concerned not only about the vast amount of money that is being spent on this scheme, but also absolutely test the environmental assertions that the Mayor has with regard to the Silvertown Tunnel. So I'm looking for you, Chair, to give a commitment that either now or offline, we will talk about the opportunities for investigating something that's extremely important to Londoners.
Thank you very much for those comments. Just remind you about the Garden Bridge. It was about procedural and contract abuse of why we did it. Are you alleging there is a procedural and contract abuse around this proposal? But as you full well know, Assembly Member Boff, we are going to have a conversation offline to discuss what the committee's response is to the correspondence to the Silvertown Tunnel group around that. They raise some important issues, but really some of the issues they raise are about opinion, about whether a bridge is the right way forward or not. They don't allege, they do allege, and I think the important issue here is about some aspects of value for money and the lack of information that's been provided to those. And I think it's important that we should ensure that information is provided to people from the right organisations in terms of large infrastructure projects. It's something the Assembly has always asked for, and if appropriate, should be shared with wider public audience. We will have that conversation, and we will have a further discussion publicly at the next meeting. Okay, if I can move on to item 7, action taken under delegated authority. Can we note the actions taken by me as chair in consultation with the party group leads, members, as well as Caroline Pigeon, MBE, AM, and relevant committee chairs to agree the actions listed in the report? Thank you very much. I'm now moving on to the main item of this meeting, relocation of City Hall. Can I welcome our guest, Mary Arpley, Chief Officer of the Greater London Authority, Simon Grinter, Head of Facilities Management, David Galley, Executive Director of Resources, Ricardo Ayat, Assistant Director of Housing and GLA. We're going to begin with a number of questions around this, but I'm going to ask Navin Shah to lead off with the questions. Just to remind those watching on the webcast, Assembly Member Shah is also Chair of the London Assembly.
Thank you, Chair, and Good morning, Mary. The comments and following questions will be based to you. As the chair has quite rightly said, in my capacity as the chair of London Assembly, I raised 59 questions with regards to relocation, to which, Mary, thank you for your reply, which we received on last Friday. Now, the responses to a number of major areas of concerns that we've had, and those include profile of City Hall as such, finances related to the proposed move, consideration of alternative sites before or in parallel to Crystal Building being proposed, critically impact on staff capacity, including clarity on who's going to be located where, including Crystal, Palestra, and other accommodation that we currently have. The issues about the planning considerations, including planning consent, design, and definitive cost considerations. So there were all these major issues, but having gone through those 59 answers that we have got, I do remain personally, on behalf of Assembly, very concerned that we only have 2 weeks left before the close of consultation deadline, and we're still trying to get grip to some of the answers to major issues and critical information that we have been seeking. So can you please tell us as to when do you think we can get clearer and more definitive answers to all these important issues that we have raised? And do you think that given where we are 2 weeks before the close of deadline, whether the consultation deadline is actually realistic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Shah, and good morning, members of the Oversight Committee. As the Chair has said, I have got Ricardo, David and Simon with me, and if I may, when I need to, I will ask them to respond to some of the detail. Okay. To your key question, consultation was 6 weeks. We are tomorrow 4 weeks in, so you're right, we are more than halfway. We are doing our absolute best to answer your questions and other people's questions as they come up. And thank you for acknowledging that we have done that. I think there are, so we will do our absolute best to answer all the questions in the 6-week period. And then I think we just need to take stock when we're at that 6 weeks. So there's an awful lot of work happening. There's an awful lot more work that will be done in the remaining couple of weeks. The critical path related to this proposal doesn't allow us very much time, because as you know, we've explained, I can go through the critical path if I need to, but that's what's driving the need for us to consult in these 6 weeks. I do think, though, that there are some questions that we are not going to be able to answer in full in the 6-week period. And so, for example, planning, which I suspect we'll come back to in a little bit more detail, but on planning, we can talk about that, but we have spoken to planning officers, senior planning officers at Newham. As I said to you in my letter, we are going to need to apply for change of use at the Crystal. And of course, that means a planning process that follows and a planning timeline that follows. We think that is manageable within our timeline, but the actual planning decision from Newham, of course, will come considerably after the end of the consultation period. And any proposal to move, final proposal to move there, would clearly have to be subject to planning. On finances, so again, we did do some early work on estimates related to the reconfiguration of the Crystal and the move out of City Hall. But those are, that's ongoing work, which we're now putting more detail behind during this 6 weeks. We're trying to tread, a very fine line here between, this is a proposal out to consultation. The decision either way won't be made until September. And so I'm trying to manage very carefully the use of time and money in that while that remains a proposal, not a decision. So again, that is why we're now developing work around the Crystal in more detail, but trying to do that to the level of detail that you need to be able to respond to the consultation. I completely accept that you need that detail, but also not to spend too much time and money on it at a point where we are still consulting. So it is a bit of a fine line. On alternatives, again, we probably want to talk about this in a bit more detail, but I have said that we will, of course, investigate any alternatives that Assembly members wish us to. All I have asked is that you identify those alternatives within the 6-week period. And I have said that if necessary, we'll spend a bit more time after the 6-week period evaluating them. And we are already looking at County Hall, as we have already been asked. So those are some of the sort of the pressures, the tensions that I am trying to manage. I expect to be able to give you more information in this meeting. I mean, the other piece of information, of course, that I know everybody wants is whether or not our current landlord is going to offer us a change to our contracted rental agreement at the moment. As I've said to you in the letter, we are in discussions with St Martin's Group. I think we would, on our side, describe them as constructive discussions, but we don't yet have anything from them formally, but absolutely expect to, within this 6-week consultation. So I can see that it looks that there are sort of key things missing, but we are absolutely committed to resolving as many of those as we possibly can within the 6 weeks.
So from your response, I deduce that given the critical path, as you explained, in terms of the strategy, you're not able to extend, the mayor won't be able to extend the consultation period. Do I get it right that the mayor wants to take a decision sometime in September? Can you tell me when in September, please? And what say we will have as the Assembly and even the staff in terms of that particular decision, whether to move or not? How will it all work?
Okay, so the intention is that the mayor takes the decision in September.
When in September?
Well, I don't know, Assembly Member Shah. I mean, I would imagine towards the end. I mean, that's what I would, because I was about to say he clearly has to have all the information he needs to be able to take the decision. So I think given that we're not closing the consultation to the 5th of August, I suspect it will be the end of September. Our problem is, as you know, if we are to leave City Hall, we don't have to give formal notice to our landlord until Christmas Day, in fact, the day before Christmas Day. But if we are to reconfigure the Crystal in time for us all to move in sometime next summer, then we're going to have to get the decision taken either way and get on with the planning consent and the final detailed design and procurement of the works at the Crystal. And we have to move in the summer because our contractual obligation to our current landlord is that we restore City Hall to the state in which we took it on.
Yeah.
And as you know, there's some considerable work there. So that's what drives us back to September. But the mayor can only take the decision once the team working on this is able to give him all the information that he needs. So, you know, so staff are have been asked to respond to the consultation by the 5th of August. We are doing a lot of sessions with staff to make sure people feel they've got the information that they need. And separately, we are getting individual questions in from staff. And at the moment, I am told I don't see the consultation in box.
Mary, we're having
Rather than get
difficulty.
any sort of consultations.
Mary, we're
Sorry,
having difficulty. You broke up in that last part of the answer. Do you want to try again of the last bit?
Yes. Okay, so sorry, I didn't realise that. You never know you're breaking up at this end. So I was going to say that in terms of staff and Assembly's response to the consultation, how do you input into the final decision? We're doing a lot of briefing sessions with staff. We've had a lot of questions from staff into the consultation inbox, which we are picking up each week and answering through the consultation bulletin. I am expecting and hoping for at least one consultation response from you as Assembly members, maybe more than one, coming in by the 5th of August. And those will be important inputs into the mayoral decision, as will reworkings of the costings, as will understanding of the planning position, as will anything that we have formally from our landlord in terms of a revised offer. All of that will come into play, which drives me to think it'll be end of September before we have a mayoral decision.
Surely Mayor won't be taking any decision before the planning consent. Now, obviously, I don't believe that you are anywhere near actually submitting application for planning consent, because we still are at block plan stage. There needs to be clarity about the scheme. Once it's submitted, there's at least, well, minimum 21 day statutory consultation with the residents, and then of course determination period by the council. So I reckon that September end even you may be stretching. The worry I have is that given lots of information, which is still major information, as I said, is still pending or awaiting clarity from the mayor's end. I find the current deadline not very viable, and also what role we will be allowed to play before mayor makes his final decision. Will we have another opportunity after this consultation to put in another submission before mayor makes his final decision about the move?
So I'll answer that first. I was going to ask Ricardo then to come in on planning if it's appropriate at this moment. I don't know whether you want to do that now, but you're right. We won't have planning permission in September, but the mayor will need to take a decision. If it is to go ahead, it'll have to be subject to planning, of course. But if you want more detail on planning, I'm then going to defer to Ricardo. In terms of further input, I think it is absolutely important to stick to the view that we're going to complete this consultation on the 5th of August. As I said, when we get to that point, I'm very happy to take stock and to do that with Assembly members, because I have a duty to you as well as to the Mayor in terms of what you think is still missing. Of course, there will be some time between the 5th of August and the mayoral decision. We've just laid that out. That's likely to be a few weeks. But I do think we need to all focus our minds, and we're definitely doing that on the officer side in terms of thinking we've absolutely got to get as far as we possibly can by the 5th of August. Would you like Ricardo to come in on the planning in a bit more detail?
Yeah, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mary, and good morning, all. So, in terms of where we are on planning, as Mary says, we've commenced discussions at a senior level with Newham's planners to ascertain how we may take the application forward. Clearly, there's a fine balance here between how much we actually do at this stage prior to the Mayor making a formal decision. However, in order to feed into his considerations, we do have to undertake a certain level of feasibility. And from those initial conversations that we've had with Newham's senior planners, they are very positive about the proposal, but have been clear to us that this would be classed as a major application, and thus a change of use application will be required for submission. In terms of timescales, we are due to have a formal pre-app meeting with the council in early August, just to make sure that we've got a full checklist of everything that we need to provide, and so that we are prepared pretty soon after the Mayor if he's minded to proceed, makes his formal decision for us to submit the planning application. Now, the statutory planning period, as this is a major application, will be 13 weeks. However, we will be seeking to enter into a planning performance agreement with the council to expedite and make that decision on a much shorter time frame. And the borough, certainly at senior officer level, have indicated that they are open to doing so. So at present, that's where we are.
How many weeks, Ricardo, it will be if it were expedited under the arrangements that you just mentioned?
So the borough, so the borough have said that they would be prepared to work with us to make the decision within 6 to 8 weeks, as opposed to the full statutory 13-week period.
Plus 21 days for public consultation, correct?
Yes, sorry.
21 days for public consultation, that will be additional to the 7-week period that you mentioned.
Exactly. So these are the specific milestones that we need to pin down with the borough.
One last question on planning. Would this also require, will it be referred to the Mayor, given its strategic application, therefore that the planning team at the GLA will need to determine the application as well, once it's been determined by Newham Council?
So at the moment, that's not the indication that we've had, and we don't believe that to be the case. But that's certainly something that we will make sure is built into the programme if required. But at the moment, our initial view that isn't the case. But if that changes, of course, we'll be clear on that.
Can you let us know about that?
Yeah.
If that changes. Okay, Chair, I think I have come to my initial question in terms of background to where we are in terms of issues that we've raised and our quite serious concerns at this juncture we have about the whole host of things. Would it be useful to let us have a quick snapshot of what the current preliminary proposal is for the public public functions as far as ground floor proposals for Crystal building is concerned, because that will throw light on information which will then deal with some of the other questions later on.
So, Mary, which one of your team, or indeed yourself, do you want to take that question, or do you want to delegate that to one of your team?
We're going to start talking about the plans for the ground floor. I'd like Simon to lead on that, please, Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Grinter, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm now on mute, Chair. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so I believe that you have seen some high-level block plans which have been worked up for options for the public spaces. This provides for a chamber in one of two locations, either in the existing auditorium, and members who've toured the building with me will remember that's the orange creation, or a new design which produces a chamber in the current exhibition space. We then have a series of committee rooms which are approximately the same size as City Hall committee rooms, which can be extended and merged into each other, and a space the equivalent of London's living room, only at a ground floor level, not at a high level. There's also, because of the way you access the building with the two wings, there's also a very large street area, which is a multi-purpose function space, which could be used for functions, special services, meetings as well. And there is a public cafe with expansion space behind it to undertake functions. As far as the chamber is concerned, it will have a adequate floor to enable the chamber configurations which you have at present, and will have a public gallery for approximately 150 people. Some of that will, if on one option, which uses the auditorium, some of that will have space for people who can't make the stairs on the ground floor, and then raked seating on the first floor. And on the other option, where we create a chamber in the exhibition area, that has more or less level access, but some raking. I'm not sure if anybody's got any precise questions they'd like me to answer on those facilities.
Assembly Member Shah?
Chair, I had a briefing, and thanks for that to Mary and Simon yesterday. So I have a pretty good picture of what those proposals are. The questions which have in pre-meeting emerged are given alternative one, which is remodeling of the existing auditorium. Is it true that you would be looking at having a glass envelope, fully glazed envelope, so that there is daylight, etc., within the chamber? And can you also confirm the capacity and the layout of chamber, in that it will be compatible to the size of the chamber that we currently have to accommodate the horseshoe as well as the sort of circular arrangement that we currently have, and also capacity of the actual public gallery, which again will be how many people it will accommodate, and b, whether it will be again comparable to what we currently have at City Hall. Thank you.
So looking first of all at the auditorium floor and the layouts we'd need, we would need to expand the orange construction that's there. So one of the design options for the architects is actually to remove that and have a fully glazed chamber, so that people passing through the building can see into it and people from other layers can see into it. That would give enough space to have the current layouts you have. The layout you have at the moment is only showing the circular layout. The architect's designers haven't had time to put the horseshoe layout in yet, but I will send you that when it's available. So we certainly envisage with some expansion of the existing auditorium to be able to accommodate the meeting formats which you have at present. Which would involve, those of you that have seen it at the moment will be where there's raked seating down to the floor level. So it would involve cutting back a significant amount of that rake seating and just leaving space for a row for wheelchair users and companions or people who can't make the stairs. Then the first floor level will be fully rake seating for 150. Now 150 is smaller than the current capacity of the public gallery at City Hall, although it is very rare that our seating is ever full in City Hall. Also, one of the differences with the rake seating in the Crystal is that the rows are shorter. You'll be aware, particularly Chair, if you're looking at it at the moment, that in the middle of the City Hall Public Gallery, we have some very long rows of seats, which doesn't necessarily encourage people to move along. So you end up with just filling ends of the rows and not the middle. But the seats are certainly shorter and more accessible rows of seats in the proposal at the Crystal, the auditorium.
And Chair, one last question on this. How do you justify the second proposal or alternative with two chambers, keeping the auditorium, which will mean you have the requirement to let it or run it to make it financially viable, and then have a new chamber which eats into substantially space which is designated for London living room, which is a major function for many reasons for City Hall workings as such. So can you say what is the justification for alternative 2 with two chambers, so to say?
Thank you. We thought it was important to show options, and obviously I very much would like to get Assembly members' views on that, and those of you who have toured around the building, we've talked about it as we walked around. So if we were to have a second option, that was the only other place we could put an Assembly chamber in the current exhibition space. However, you're quite right, it raises the issue of the auditorium, which is currently a 270-seater auditorium with a reasonably small floor space. Presently, it's been used for conferences and that kind of thing, so we understand there will be some conference business. There may also be some work that some of the teams in the GLA might want a large presentation space with a large screen for. But I think it would be fair to say that if we had a chamber in the exhibition area and we maintained the auditorium, then the use of the auditorium would not be every day.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any more questions on this.
Would you, Assembly Member Shah, would you like to just continue with some questions around accessibility on the section that we've got and the formal questions?
I'm happy to move to that section. I just wondered if any other members had questions on the alternative layouts.
Okay, I've got a number of members that have indicated from, I think, if they could just indicate whether they want to come in on accessibility, which is the next set, or not. It's not clear. So I've got Onka, Susan, Caroline, Sian, Keith, Andrew. Andrew, I presume, is on this section that you want to come in on, right? So I've got a nod from that. Susan, it's this section. Onka, is it this section or the next one? You're muted. Yep, go on.
I want to come in on the accessibility one.
Fine. Okay. Caroline, Pigeon.
Yeah, the accessibility I want to come in
Fine.
on.
Okay. So if I take Sian, you want to come in on this section or accessibility?
Sorry, my hand is still up from trying to speak about Silvertown earlier.
Sorry, I didn't realise that. I apologise. Do you want to come in on this section or the second section? Okay, thank you very much. And then Keith Prince, do you want to come in on this section or the following section?
No, Chair, I wanted to come in on the planning section.
Okay, so let's take you under this section. I'll take Susan, Keith, then Andrew. Assembly Member Hall.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. First of all, Mary, you're doing a consultation, and by your own admittance, key things are missing. They're your words, not mine. Do you think it's sensible to have a consultation when, quote, key things are missing?
Assemblymember Hall, I did say that there are still 2 weeks of the consultation to go, and we are doing our best to fill all those gaps in the time between now and the 5th of August. But I did say that some things, such as planning consent, can't possibly come in this consultation period.
Yes, we also need to look around the finances, though. Clearly, some of those haven't been worked out properly. And since the reason for us moving is to save money, surely the finances should be in order before anything else. We've got 2 weeks left. People, I assume, have already started answering. When, as I say, your words again, key things are missing. I think it's disgraceful, quite frankly. How can you make a proper judgment when there are all sorts of things missing, not least the finances, which are vital at this time? I'll come back to finances, obviously. Ricardo, you told the staff that we'd be able to get 150 staff members into the building. Is that still your comment, or are you going to make a different projection now?
So I made that comment in a small group discussion with assembly members on some assembly members on this call. So it wasn't a comment made to staff. However, the question, as I recall it, was what was the specific capacity of the Crystal now, as in how it's currently used? And I answered it, based on the information that I have and my understanding of how it's currently used. Now, we've clearly said elsewhere that the building is currently under occupied. I think that's accepted and that has been explained. Separately, we have responded to a question posed in the letter from Assemblymember Shah about capacity and looking forward how many staff we could potentially accommodate at the Crystal. So just to clarify that, the answer I gave previously was for a very specific question.
I asked the question as well, and I asked you to confirm it was correct, and I was told you could. I was also told by a member of staff that it was 150. So can you confirm to me now, how many people do we think we could get into the building now? As in, once whatever you're going to do is being done. And what are we looking at, Ricardo?
So there is still further work for us to do to work out the exact capacity. But as we speak, we believe that as a minimum, in terms of the office floors, we could accommodate as a minimum 246 people. And depending on the final configuration and where the touch points are based, that we could accommodate much more than that. And thinking about how we work remotely and flexibly going forward, there is an expectation that not all staff will be at the office 5 days a week. So again, that gives us greater flexibility to accommodate more staff on different days and on a weekly basis.
Well, they're not going to be able to all be there, are they? Because there won't be room for them. Is that not correct, Ricardo?
Well, this is the point that I'm making. So we're working to configure the building so that we can get as many staff in the building at any given time as possible. But that also needs to take into account remote working, flexible working arrangements going forward.
I understand that. I'm trying to get to the nub of this. There's a lot of money being spent, although clearly Mary has said that key things are missing, including finances, so we don't know how much it's going to cost. We're not terribly sure how many people are going to be put in there. We're not terribly sure whether we'll get the planning. What happens if we get to the date, the day before Christmas, when we have to give our notice in, and we haven't got planning permission? What are we going to do then? Anybody? Hello?
So I'll kick off on this one. So we, as I said in my response earlier to Assemblymember Shah, we are working hard with the council, London Borough of Newham, to try and get an expedited process in place to make the decision over a 6 to 8 week period. Based on the current time frame we're working to, that would mean we would be in a position to get a planning consent before we trigger the break clause with the landlord, and that is absolutely our aim and what we're working to. However, as I've said, there is because this is classed as a major application, there is a 13-week statutory period, and our programme that we're working to seeks to mitigate the risk of the full 13-week period running as far as possible. But if we are in that position, there are certain measures and mitigations we can put in place to recover the programme elsewhere, and that goes back to looking at feasibility, other bits of the programme that we could be getting on with, like procurement, for example, and having those working with us on the project lined up to get going as quickly as possible.
Okay, so I'll ask again. What happens if we get to the date when we have to exercise the break clause, the day before Christmas, Mary has told us? What happens if we get to Christmas Eve and we haven't got planning permission? If you can just answer me that, what are we going to do? Are we going to give in the break clause, or are we not, if we don't have planning permission by then?
So shall I take that question, Assembly Member Hall? So you're right, we'll need to have a contingency plan should we find ourselves in that situation, but I don't want it to be recorded that I said we would find ourselves in that situation. I'm saying should we find ourselves in that situation, which is not our intention. And that's another piece that we are working on. One option will be to enter into an agreement with our current landlord for the possibility of an extension. Another, absolute nuclear option would be to say, actually, well, we're not making the move. But I think that by the time, as we work through September, and certainly into October, it will become very clear to us whether or not we can achieve that track that Ricardo has laid out. But we will need a contingency plan, and the most obvious one is to discuss a short extension with our landlord. Simon and others have worked over many years to secure a very constructive relationship with our current landlord, and I think that would be our first port of call.
Okay, I'll leave it at that, Chairman. I'll come back with some more questions later. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Prince on planning, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, that's a nice segue into what we're talking about anyway. I'll ask Mary, but Ricardo, feel free to come in if you need to. Mary, this is a major change of use. It's changing from one use group to another. So it makes it a major application. Someone earlier referred to the fact that it may be called in by the Mayor. I very much doubt the Mayor will be allowed to call it in because he has an interest. But of course, there is the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State would have every right to call this application in. What plans have you made in the instance of the Secretary of State calling the application in?
I'm going to have to defer that to Ricardo, Assembly Member Prince, because that's part of the detailed planning.
Yes, so again, this is a possibility and a risk that we will have to manage. As I said earlier, given the conversations that we've had to date with the borough and the fact that we are about to instigate a formal pre-app meeting to discuss these matters further, we believe that the possibility of the Secretary of State calling in this application is slim. But
don't bet on it. Well,
I've not said it's not possible.
Surely a few dinners and a few text exchanges might bring it into play. Do you know what I mean?
But we are, those of us who are familiar with the planning process, it's very difficult to make predictions. All you can do is do all you can to mitigate and satisfy all of the requirements of the local authority, and that is what we are working to do.
So, sorry, if I might come in, that makes that pre-app meeting very important, and Ricardo and the team are working hard to schedule that at the very end of the consultation period. So that will become part of the consideration.
Yeah, having a pre-app, Mary, doesn't mitigate against the Secretary of State calling it in, and will not colour the Secretary of State's options on any of that. This all seems a bit Heath Robinson, Mary. You know, it looks like it's all been thrown together in a bit of a rush, really. Surely the mayor's been in power for 4 years. You've been CEO for now how long? A couple of years, is it, Mary?
18 months.
18 months. Well, there we go. When did it first occur to you that this might be a good idea, bearing in mind that we've known for the last 20 years that there was a break clause in 20 years, and the mayor would have known for the last 4 years that there's an option of a break clause? When did this first come to your into your mind that this might be an option?
So it's the combination of the savings that lie ahead for not only the GLA group but the GLA, and you know, the way we were able to work remotely at almost no notice. It's the combination of those two factors that meant only in May did we start thinking about whether we should seriously consider this break clause, because up to that point, I think the received wisdom had been that, you know, we're spilling out of City Hall, and you know, when I arrived, there were some officers were discussing the possibility of getting more space, not reducing the space, but I said that from the beginning that wasn't an option for me to increase our space. But we've got this sort of myth in our minds that, you know, we're spilling out of City Hall. We can't do without the space, and also, of course, we have to have an alternative. We have to have a reasonable alternative to move to, and Siemens' vacation of City Hall is still relatively recent. I think we forget that that is still very recent. So, to be absolutely honest, it's the combination of those two things that meant that actually, I think we really have got to consider this break clause extremely seriously, both in terms of its financial impact, and we can come back to the figures, but you know, we have worked those figures hard already. We need to rework them as we understand more, but we have worked them hard. So it's a combination of the money and actually the realization that we can operate off a much smaller footprint than we currently do.
So in all the emergency planning that you would have done, and all the forward-looking planning that you would have done in the case of an outbreak of a virus or some emergency plan that meant that this one, City Hall was brought to a grinding halt, two, that the mayor would run out of money. After all, it was pretty much on that projection before we had the virus. In none of those instances did it occur to anyone that an option might be to move out of City Hall. It only happened a couple of weeks ago, and then you had this knee-jerk reaction to it. Is that what you're saying to us, Mary?
I didn't say it happened a couple of weeks ago, Assemblymember Prince. I said in early May, we came to the view that we had to consider this seriously. At that point then, you know, we're up against the break, the contractual break at Christmas. But, you know, I accept this is tight. I'm not saying we've got oodles of time, but I am saying, I think as a set of officers, we think with a lot of hard work and some pace, we can allow the mayor to take an informed decision in time to exercise this break clause, if that's what he wishes to do.
But what you're not saying, Mary, is that you or your team had the foresight to look at this before May, which is only a few weeks ago by anyone's measure. You did not have the foresight to look at this as a possibility that there may be a crisis, in which case we needed to come out of City Hall. It didn't occur to you that there was an opportunity, let's say a year ago, because 6 months you have to get your feet under the table. A year ago, there was an opportunity that the break clause would be coming up, but at no time previous to this, you looked at that as a possible option.
So when I arrived 18 months ago, I did have a conversation with Simon and others about clearly, you know, the nature of the lease and the break and the rest of that. As I said to you at the time, there was a proposal on the table, potentially take on more space, not reduce. We didn't, at the time, have the crystal as an option. And the view was that, you know, to exercise, to even think about exercise the break, we had to have a realistic alternative. And, you know, alongside that is the view that we're spilling out of City Hall, we need more space, not less. And we did not at that point, we had a conversation about it, we did not at that point intend to exercise the break.
Chair, just one more question.
You know, the world has changed, Assembly Member Prince, hasn't it? It's changed for everybody.
Mary, can I just make this point? And you said it earlier yourself, which I found absolutely astonishing. The fact that you've not looked at alternatives. You're asking Assembly members to make suggestions on any alternatives that you might then consider, but only if they let you know what those alternatives are within the next 2 weeks. Do you not think there is an onus on yourself and your team to look at what alternatives may be available on this issue and look at what other sites may be available? Do you not think that's part of the process? Do you not think you are lacking in your responsibilities in not looking at alternatives that may be available? Would you and should you have not looked at alternatives when you said you looked at this previously? And when you said you were looking at alternative sites, would you not have looked at alternatives then? I mean, this is a real poor show, Mary. Real amateurish approach to how we should move forward. We are the 5th most important economy in the world. The Mayor of London represents what I would argue is the greatest city in the world, and here we are messing around, tight timelines, don't even know if we're going to get planning permission, and you've looked at no alternatives. Do you think that's really a responsible approach, Mary?
I do think it's responsible in the context. The context is that we think that this will save about £55 million over 5 years. And I can see Assembly members shaking their heads, but this is what we're going to have to demonstrate. And David can talk about the finances in a minute, but the scale of that saving is absolutely predicated on us moving into space that the group, the GLA group, either already owns or leases. And so that's really, really important. It's also predicated on the fact that the space that we move into will be less expensive than our current space, which by dint of the rent arrangements, but also the rates and the service charges given the location, is extremely expensive. And you don't get that scale of savings by finding another building in close proximity that we're going to pay similar rent on. So that the crystal and palestra are driven by the group accommodation available to us, which actually we think as a team of officers can be made to work. That is really, really important.
Well,
we won't get
Chair,
close.
I appreciate your tolerance. I'm going to stop there, but I'm only going to close by saying you're making a load of assumptions about what's available and what's not available, what would be and what wouldn't be affordable, but you've done nothing to find it out. I find that absolutely incredible. Chair, I'm very grateful for the time you've given me. Thank you.
Assembly Member Boff.
Thought we should have moved out of City Hall in 2002, but then again, I'm just me. Moving house is an exciting time, but as you can see, it's a very stressful one with lots of uncertainties. And I'd just like to record my gratitude to all the staff who have the job of working on this, and especially to Simon Grinter for showing me over the crystal. And I could see for myself the opportunities that we do have in this iconic building. Any new chamber, I think, needs to be more accessible than the existing chamber. Being on the ground floor will, I think, help enormously. Can I just ask one thing? A new chamber needs to be flexible. Can you ensure that we don't make the same mistakes made during the Olympics and put in retractable seating in advance and not as an afterthought?
Can I ask Simon to take that one, Assemblymember Boff?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that feedback. All the designs we have at the moment are just very high-level concepts, and certainly I will be working on the detail with our designers and our architects to make sure that we do have a flexible, accessible, and impressive space.
Okay, are there any other members who want to come in on this scene setting section before we move on to accessibility? Okay, I don't see any others indicating. I could be wrong. Can you just speak up? Just want to check. Okay, then I'm going to move to Assemblymember Shah to continue the questioning. You need to unmute yourself, Assemblymember Shah.
I have done so. Thank you, Chair. On accessibility, there's been a huge reliance in terms of good accessibility on the Elizabeth line, which we are not sure as to when it will be actually up and running. There's a talk about next year, towards the end of next year, but no one knows for sure. Now, I understand from the response we have got to one of the questions that there is some assessment being done of the GLA staff in terms of their home postcode to determine accessibility to Crystal. Can you tell us whether there are any preliminary findings as to impact of the move on average commuter times for staff, commuting time for staff?
Not yet, Assemblymember Shah. The analysis is still being done, but we will have it back within the consultation period.
And you let us know what they are.
Yes, we'll share them.
Thank you very much. The current City Hall can be accessed by multiple means of public transport, whereas the Crystal has very few transport links other than the Elizabeth line we just mentioned. What more is being done to improve accessibility to Crystal?
Ricardo, would you mind taking that?
Sure. As well as the new Crossrail station at Custom House, they're due to open next year, we believe. There is also the Royal Victoria DLR station, which is a 5-minute walk from the Crystal. There's Canning Town, which is about a 15-minute walk or quicker on a bike. The plans for the area across the docks will be to look quite closely on the public realm, connectivity of the area, how the building links up to the XL and Custom House station, and looking at the route from the site through to Canning Town. Part of that will be to look at cycling routes in and around the area to improve those. There are a number of plans afoot.
I mean, some of the options you indicated are pretty sort of time intensive, and whether they also have safety considerations there as well of the staff and members alike. But moving on to the next one, which also in a sense relates to planning consent, would there be any designated parking spaces arranged for GLA staff who need it? If so, how many? And will that be part of the planning package? Because that is something that you will need to determine at this stage. What is it, please?
I think that's probably for Simon.
Yeah, Simon.
Thank you. Well, there is some limited parking currently at the Crystal, but as you'll be aware, it is not our policy to provide staff parking.
Sure.
We encourage the use of public transport, walking, cycling, etc. So we will definitely be looking at the parking facilities that are available there for blue badge users and for other essential uses.
But other than that, the policy would be no car parking for staff or visitors. Is that correct?
That's correct. For visitors who have a blue badge, who have an accessibility need, then we will be able to provide something. But for other visitors, no, there will be an expectation that public transport will be used.
Ricardo mentioned ability to sort of cycle, etc. Can you tell us what more is being done to improve cycle safety in crossing the river in the vicinity of Royal Docks? Have you actually started working on that?
Yes, so as I said earlier, Assembly Member Shah, the team at the Royal Docks, a key part of the programme is to look at cycle safety and connectivity across the docks. And that work was sort of programmed in prior to the proposed move of City Hall to the Crystal. So there is a programme of work and feasibility currently on the way to look at those measures. I am not in a position to go into specifics here, but yeah, should you want to see the specifics of the Royal Docks team's programme on this, we can share them separately.
If you will, please, because we'd also be interested in knowing when exactly the completion is also planned, to see whether how that dovetails in with the move that we are talking about. Yeah. Chair, I think that that's my section done.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to call on Assembly Member Onka Sahota. You're on mute, I think, Assembly Member.
Hi. Good. Okay. Hi, Mary. Do we have a date of completion when the Elizabeth line will be running to the Crystal? Can you tell us when that date will be?
I don't have that date.
So it's an assumption we're making that it'll be open by then. Okay.
Yeah, well, we're tying in with the current view that it'll be summer 21, but I don't know any more than that.
Okay. Do you think that the seat of London government should be accessible to all Londoners?
Well, I think we should try and make it accessible. I absolutely agree. But I don't think anywhere is accessible to everybody.
But some things are more accessible than others. What assessment have you made of the impact it'll have on the people who live in South West London, West London, North West London, of the travel times to the Crystal? What assessment have you made of the impact it'll have on not on the staff, but on the residents of these areas?
So we haven't, as I said in my letter to Assembly Member Shah, we haven't done a particular assessment on members of the public, but we do have staff living in all parts of London. And so when we get the postcode analysis, we are very happy to extract data related to parts of London from that, if you would like me to.
I think doing assessment of staff who are employed who come there for the job ride is different from looking at the impact on the average resident. Will you undertake that assessment? And if not, why not?
Well, if you want us to do...
No, Mary, not what I want. This is what Londoners want. This is what my constituents want. They want to be accessible to City Hall. They already find it difficult coming to City Hall where it currently is, and you were taking City Hall even far east-wide than where it's now. And it's a big, big error that in the consultation process, you haven't assessed the impact on these residents who are being disfranchised from their London government.
So what I would say, Assembly Member, is that I mean, there'll be other residents who will be brought closer, won't there? So I accept that those in your constituency, although again with Crossrail, some of those the Crystal will be far more accessible to some of your constituents than others. I say again, when we get the staff analysis, that analysis will be from points all over London. We can then, we can take points in each constituency, if you like, and have a look at those impacts. The commuting times won't be any different for a member of staff from Ealing or a member of the public. Now, the motivation might be different. I accept that point that you're making, but I think in the analysis of the home postcodes, we will have enough data to show clusters of points from different constituencies of all assembly members and the impact on that. If for some reason it turns out that our staff are absent, there are some places that our staff don't just don't live, I'm happy to patch that up with extra analysis so we get the full coverage. But I do think it'll come from the analysis of staff postcodes. If there are gaps, I'll fill them.
Okay, Mary, look, I don't accept, right, that you can extrapolate employee data onto the impact on residents. I come from a background of science, and that there's dangers of extrapolation of data, and you should know that there are the risks inherent in that. But I'm concerned, right, and also, look, we need to find out how the average London resident from our part, it's not only my constituents, it's also North West London, also constituents of other members who sit in that part of West London, because the City Hall is being moved to far more east to a site which is less accessible. And also, I know we'll come into the finances later and look at the impact on moving this site to East London. But I'm concerned, right, that no assessment has been made, and no effort has been made to look at, right, at the impact on the residents. And also, just earlier on, look, it must have been apparent to you very early on when you took over this job as the chief officer that the business rates of City Hall were high. But it's only until this May you're happy to stay there. And it's only after May you've decided to look at an alternative. Why didn't you start the process earlier on? Because the business rates won't have changed.
No, well, I did try and explain that before. So yes, as I've said before, when I first arrived, there was some consideration underway about City Hall and the space and whether or not the break, which was sort of 2 years ahead at the time, should be exercised. But in that world, no one could quite believe that we might be able to manage with less space, not more. And, frankly, we weren't faced with the savings targets that we now are. So focus probably was more on, well, we're going to have to get ourselves organised for 2026, because actually, remember, this is a break of a lease that finishes in 2026 anyway. So we were going to have to be ready for 2026. That was absolutely in our minds. But as I said, this sort of coincidence of this extraordinary impact of this virus, when actually we are functioning, you are functioning as the Assembly, the Mayoralty is functioning, the staff are functioning, actually without any buildings at all, the exception this morning of Assembly Member Duval. And the need across the group to deliver a saving, of almost £500 million, 30 million within the GLA. That's when we have to look at our costs of accommodation in a way that I think you are right, we didn't feel we needed to look at 12 months ago in the same way. Now we do.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm moving on to Assembly Member Caroline Pidgeon.
Thank you. I just on the discussion we had about cycling a little while ago, having visited the building now, the cycle facilities compared to City Hall are really poor. I think there's only a handful of showers compared to the number we have at City Hall. But also how people would get there. I mean, it didn't seem obvious to me, decent cycle routes. There are dual carriageways everywhere. It didn't feel the sort of safe environment that I have been led to believe. But my question really relates to the cable car. I had said early on that if you were looking to move there, would you be able to give free access to staff at City Hall to use the cable car as a way to get from North Greenwich, which might be preferable. If people have a folding bike, they could take it on that. But equally, the capacity at North Greenwich. Some of the trains start from there, so you wouldn't have such crowded tubes. I'd like to know what discussions are going on there. But equally, the contract for the cable car comes up for renewal in 2022. So potentially you might sell that off or look at what you might do with it. And then that's one of the transport modes that's potentially open to staff being taken away and making the building less accessible. So perhaps, Mary, you could comment on that, please.
So, so you suggested that that particular idea, Assemblymember Pigeon, very early on, and we have definitely logged that, and that's part of the conversation that the team are having or will have with TfL. I'm not sure whether we've started that conversation or not yet.
Assemblymember Pigeon, do you wish to come back on that?
Does anyone have an answer then? Mary doesn't know. Do any of the other officers know?
So that is a conversation we are having with TfL, Assemblymember Pigeon, and will revert in due course.
Yeah. The other thing that has been suggested to us, actually, I think this has come from staff, to your point, is that people with foldable bikes might be able to get their bikes over on the cable car, but people with other bikes won't be able to. And so we have been asked by staff, would it be possible for people to cycle in, use Pier Walk, which is another TfL building, possibly to store bikes and or shower, and then hop over on the cable car without the bike and leave it securely there. And that's another conversation we are having with TfL.
I think crossing the Thames is going to be very difficult for some staff, even if people are confident cyclists. Going through something like the Rotherhithe Tunnel is pretty horrendous. So actually having those options, if you decide to go to the Crystal, I'm still assuming it's an if and not a done deal, that needs to be looked at. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Amish Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, I'm astonished that no assessment has been carried out at all as to what Londoners think about this proposed move. And in that context, I would have thought that, that was something that should have been done, right at the beginning, whilst we're undertaking assessment quite rightly of what the staff feel. But in that context, will the new chamber have the same audience capacity and flexibility to be used by other public groups, charities and community groups? Now, this ties to a question that may come in later on about the loss of symbolism. One of the things about City Hall, certainly I as a constituency member, do like is getting school visits from schools in my constituency, community groups coming, events like Holocaust Memorial Day, many other events. I've been down to the Crystal, and I just don't see how the Crystal, even if adapted, can actually accommodate the many groups that actually use City Hall. Royal British Legion comes to mind, and so on. Symbolism sometimes does mean something, and the symbolic location of City Hall or somewhere in central London and the ability of Londoners to come to somewhere which is central is very, very important. I'm so absolutely astonished that you did not actually think of carrying out an assessment of, of what Londoners think is their building after all, or any building that we move to has implications for them.
I'll ask Simon to address the question about flexibility of the chamber and the space, and then I'll come back to you on the question of Londoners.
Thank you. Certainly, all the spaces which we currently have at City Hall, we are looking to replicate at the Crystal. And one of the advantages of the space at the Crystal is that it's all at ground floor. Because at the moment, we have the space split up in City Hall between lower ground floor, the second floor chamber, and the 9th floor living room. So one of the advantages of having those spaces together is that, dependent on the design, and we've got our clever design team looking at that, spaces can flow into each other. So I feel that the spaces that we have at City Hall will definitely be replicated there, will definitely have the flexibility, and probably even more flexibility, because one of the things that those of you that have visited the Crystal have seen is that we have that very large 3-storey street which divides the two links. That in its own right is about the same size as our map and cafe area in City Hall. It's a far more usable space and naturally flows into what will be the living room one side and what would be the chamber the other side. Now, certainly the chamber public seating will be smaller than City Hall, but the chamber floor and all the other arrangements should be exactly the same size. So I don't think there are going to be any issues with people coming and using the space. It's certainly our intention that they will be available for community groups, for members, mayoral uses, all the things that the space is currently available for.
Okay.
And just to reinforce what Simon said, I mean, the absolute intention is that it's a, busy, lively, well-used, well-visited city hall like the current one. That's absolutely at the heart of this proposal. In terms of Londoners, I think it's fair to say, Assemblymember Desai, that this does go back to the money. And the view is in the light of the financial cuts we're facing, what would people prefer us to do? Would they like us to stay in City Hall and continue paying more than we would have to elsewhere? Or would they rather we made those cuts in a different way? And several of people have asked me what this would mean. Assemblymember Shah has asked me in his letters. It will mean cuts to jobs at the GLA and cuts to programmes for Londoners, because we don't have many other areas of fixed costs. And so we've taken the view that that's the choice that we should be at least exploring in detail.
Chair, thank you. Chair, I really got to put this question to Mary. And we are going to be asking questions about finances very shortly. But what worries me, and I'm not reassured by answers to the very legitimate questions raised by Assemblymember Prince, that this whole exercise smacks of being rushed. Now, you said that in May, serious thought, I'm just looking at my notes, was given to moving because of the pandemic, that staff could work from home, as we've seen over March, over April and May, and the savings figures. The information that was given to me suggests that serious thought was being given, in fact, not just more than serious thought, not by members of your team, I may add, but by other people at City Hall, to actually not renewing the lease well before the current pandemic started, well before we were aware of all the savings that needed to be made. This was a good few months ago. That's certainly my understanding, which is very different to what you've told us.
Well, I think we need to clear this up here and now, because I think if anybody was having those conversations, Simon and I would have known about them.
I'm glad you said that, Mary. Yep.
Yes, so I think we need to be absolutely clear about this. I played out 18 months ago. It was a question.
Yeah.
But Simon, can you shed any light on the situation that Assemblymember Desai plays out there?
Assemblymember Desai, I have absolutely no knowledge of that at all.
Indeed. And I did
first time
say that this wasn't from your team.
Well, it should, the person who has the relationship with the landlord is Simon. Nobody else has the relationship with the landlord.
And the first time we spoke to the landlord was when the consultation was opened. So there'd been no conversation on it at all.
Yeah, not speaking to the landlord, that's another issue. But was there, as I said very clearly, that the information I was given or led to believe did not come from the people I spoke to, or who told me they were not spoken to by members of your team. Let me be very clear. But the thinking about not renewing the lease emanated a few months ago, before the savings figures was identified, before the current pandemic.
Well, if anybody was thinking about that, Assemblymember Desai, I would be, one, amazed, and two, they spoke to neither Simon nor I.
Fine. Just one last question, Chair. References been made to the current virus. In your contingency planning, if there's, as expected or by many experts, that there is a return of the virus sometime later in the year, October, November, clearly it affects the construction and building trades. Have you taken that into account? Because there are some major works that are going to be done in the crystals.
I think that Ricardo has taken that into account, but he needs to speak on that.
Sure. Okay.
Yes, we certainly have, and the program that we are working to, that is identified as one of the key risks. And Mary outlined certain contingencies that we have to consider were we not able to secure planning consent this calendar year. And that would equally apply to this potential outcome. If there is a second wave, then given, as you say, the need to procure materials and works, just as any other construction or capital programme, this one would be impacted as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we're now moving on to financial considerations. Apologies. Assembly Member Susan Hall.
No worries, Chair, no worries. I've just got two things to pick up on the previous things, if you will indulge me for a couple of minutes. Mary, you said we do have staff living in all parts of London. Of course, you've got staff living outside London because they can't afford to live in London. So they come to a central point, which is London Bridge. It's going to be much, much more difficult. I know at least two members of staff. It's going to take well over 2 hours to get in. So can you make sure that you look at staff that live outside London as well?
Yes, sorry, just to be really clear, yes, we're doing all postcodes are coming into this analysis, not
Good.
just people who live in London.
Right, just so as we don't forget those people that, as I say, can't even afford to live in London. The other point is, would it not be better if we got all of our staff in one space? You've said that there'll be more and more staff wanting to work from home. So therefore, would it not be better to get all the staff from all over London all into City Hall? Because obviously, if everybody's in one place, it's got to be a more economical way of working in any event. And I really don't want to hear that all the other buildings don't cost anything because we own them. There is a cost implication to everything. Mary?
So we have taken the view that retaining City Hall in the way that you suggest won't deliver us the scale of savings. Now we can model that option. It won't take very long to do that, but it doesn't get us to the 55 million.
You haven't modelled it already? You must have done, surely.
Well, because we know it doesn't get anything close to the 55.
Right. Well, I have serious concerns about your financing, and by your own admission, the key things are missing from the finances, but I'll struggle on. How much, bearing in mind, we're now going to have a multi-office mayor because he's going to have 2 offices. Most of our staff won't even have a desk. What sort of square footage are we looking at both of his offices? Ricardo, how about you? You're the planner here. What square footage are we looking at for both of our multi-office mayors?
Assembly Member Hall, that'll be for Simon, I'm afraid, not Ricardo, because Simon's working on the detail of the building.
I'm afraid I can't give you that detail at the moment because, as was mentioned earlier, we're only at block plan stage with the Crystal, and we haven't started plans for other sites yet. But I'd be very happy to show that to you once we've developed those plans.
What sort of square footage does the mayor and his entourage have at the moment?
Again, to be precise, I'll have to come back to you, because I haven't got the plans in front of me. We would be looking to try and replicate the space he currently has in his office at the Crystal, but I'll have to come back to you with detail.
And what about his office in the Palestra? Same sort of size?
Presumably, it will be smaller, because if the Crystal becomes the City Hall and the seat of government and democracy for London, then most official guests would be seen there, not at Palestra, which is going to be essentially a back office function.
Okay, I think there's many of us that would raise our eyes, if I may say so, at that time. Okay, Chair, I'll go on to starting on some of the financial bits. I'm sure I heard this wrong. I thought I heard somebody say, could have been Mary, that no conversation with the landlord was had before you started going into the plans with the Crystal. Is that right?
Well, Simon, I think Simon said that. So we thought very carefully about sort of the choreography of all of the announcement of the consultation and who we needed to tell when, and we took great care to make sure leaders, assembly group leaders, were in the loop before it was made public. And we had a whole sort of schedule of people who we had to alert when. And our current landlord was told of the mayor's proposal the day before the consultation was launched.
So
that's what we were referring.
Just to absolutely confirm this, no conversation was had with the mayor before you started all of this as to whether the landlord would be prepared to reduce our rent, give us a rent holiday, look at anything else. So nothing was done on that basis before you started all this consultation, with all the cost implications of all of this consultation and looking into this. Is that actually right?
So no, it's not right, because I'm going to ask Ricardo to talk about this. We got some professional advice on rental levels at all the different places we were considering, and the prospect of renegotiated rental arrangements with our own landlord. So that was all done, and that suggested again that we will not get close to the 55 million saving. But of course we have to talk to our current landlord, but we have to talk to him with absolute clarity of the alternative that we have on the table. And the time available to us, and we've talked about the critical path already this morning, but the time available to us did not allow us to have a serial process where we have a negotiation with our landlord first and then a consultation with others. So we are running them in parallel, but we are doing that based on some expert advice from the advisors we normally use for this type of thing, that actually the move, it's suggested every which way we look at it, it is the move, the relocation, that will deliver the highest level of savings.
Without even having discussed it with the landlord first, with our existing landlord?
We didn't discuss it with the existing landlord first, no, because you have to handle these things in the right way, and
yes,
and we took the view that that was the right way to do it. I don't know whether Ricardo or Simon want to add to what I've said.
Yes, Ricardo, what?
Yeah.
You tell me what you think.
So, not much more to add to what Mary has said, except we have on retainer a professional estate manager, Avison Young, who manages all of our the GLAP estate, and we rely on them to provide us with this type of advice. We looked at the current property market, and notwithstanding sort of COVID-19 and the obvious implications that there will be for property and office accommodation going forward, given the location of City Hall, that initial assessment that we had asked be undertaken demonstrated to us that the best position commercially for us to be in order to enter negotiations with the landlord, the best way for us to do that was to undertake that work independently of having that discussion with the landlord, partly to protect our commercial position, but partly to reflect the realities of the property market in this area of London where City Hall is located. So that informed the approach that we took.
Well, I'm assuming it's a falling property market, but well, let's wait and see. Can you just confirm, is City Hall, I'm assuming it is City Hall a listed building?
Simon?
No, City Hall is not listed.
Is it not?
No.
Goodness me, I wonder if anybody will think to be doing that. Right, okay. Has any further thought been given to how the additional required savings, which I believe is around 28 million for the core group, will be realised in the event of the relocation going ahead? Where else are you looking to be making the savings?
So we're kicking that process off right now in terms of the 21-22 budget process. Of course, coming to budget and performance at the end of November with that budget, and we will need to run with enough thinking on savings with and without this move until the decision is taken either way. So that's only just starting.
Only just starting.
Well, the budget process is only just kicked off. The budget guidance from the Mayor was issued.
Yes, I'm well aware of that.
Yeah, and so that's been the trigger for our budget process start.
So I hope we've been working on that for a while. Can a cost breakdown of the estimate of £8 million that it's going to cost to relocate to City Hall be provided?
Yes.
Yes. Do you actually have one?
Well,
or is it something
yes.
that's being worked on? Is it finished?
I'm going to ask David to speak to this. David hasn't had to say anything yet, but he will come in on the finances. We gave an early breakdown of it in the consultation document.
Yes, you've told me you've been working on everything else. I'm assuming.
Well, we will refine that at the end of the consultation period based on where we've got to by then. But David can come in and talk on the money.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So the original split of the 8 million figure we quoted was 5 million for converting the crystal, 2 million for equipment, $500,000 for records management, 300,000 for FM contracts, and 200,000 for fees. Now, as Mary says, that was the estimate that we produced as part of the consultation. As Ricardo has said, that was also an estimate that was verified by our property consultants, Avison Young. Clearly, those numbers were indicative at that particular point, and we're working on refining the exact detail of that. But what I'd emphasise is that that sum is, a huge amount of money. It's actually, more than the existing rent that we are paying on City Hall. It's a huge sum of money. So I'm confident that that sum is prudent. It covers all sorts of eventualities and things that we are working on now, and confident that we'll be able to contain the costs of the move if the Mayor decided to proceed with the proposal.
Can I just come in on this point? On the 8 million, does that 5 million for the crystal and the rest is for the GLA, the entire GLA moves for Palestra and Union Street? Do those costs, does that 8 million include those costs? I'm unclear in the way that you've broken that down.
Sorry, the 5 million includes the estimated costs that we'd relate to for the move into Palestra, but obviously there are elements of that that will overlap. So the equipment, for instance, there'll be equipment, I'm sure, that will be required additionally, say for IT move, for allowing us to move to Palestra.
Sorry for being, just want to come back, sorry for being pedantic about it. The 5 million crystal cost also includes Palestra cost and Union Street costs.
It includes our estimate of the Palestra cost, but obviously there's some of the other costs I mentioned are ones that also will come in. So say for equipment or the impact of some of the fees. And
in effect, we're talking about 3 locations here for the GLA to move into. I just want to make sure that this 8 million figure covers all those issues. There isn't another cost elsewhere.
I mean, the 8 million figure is the full estimate we have for the exit from City Hall that has obviously cost implications at Palestra and at the Crystal. I'm not anticipating there'd be additional costs at Union Street, but that's obviously something that we need to look at.
Okay, just to clarify, at budget and performance, you gave a list of costs in terms of savings starting at 63 million, minus the dilapidations that we'd have to pay at City Hall, minus 10, and then of the 53 million left, presumably we have to take off the 8 million for these costs, the cost of the move. I just want to get what comes down. What's the potential savings, the real savings, both in one-off expenditure as well as reoccurring in terms of contributions to the budget? And I want to clarify the contributions to the budget for next year's budget as well. Can you just take us through that? You may have been able to refine it since budget and performance, but so members have got a clear picture in their mind about what cost and savings we're talking about, what we should take into account, what we shouldn't be taking into account.
Sure. So first of all, to clarify the basis of that 63 million, that's based on 5 years worth of the overall costs of City Hall. That's the rent at the assumed higher level that would come into place in December 21, plus the rates plus service charge. So 5 times 12.6, 63 million. Off that sum,
Let me stop you there. So why do we choose 5 years and not 3 years or not 2 years? How does that work? Why have you reached? What's the best? Why do financial people like yourself say that's what I should be looking at? What's that? Why have you chosen 5 years?
That felt to be the right time period, given that the lease would expire December 26. So it's the 5 years from the exit point of December 21. Now, clearly, we could look at the analysis over a longer period, or indeed a shorter period, which we'll need to do as part of the consultation response, because the savings will still remain ongoing beyond December 26. But obviously, the level of savings will be less if you take a shorter period of time.
Okay, so fine, continue on. So I've got 63 million in the bank if I proceed with this over 5 years. Yep.
So then of the 63, you deduct the 8 I've described earlier as the one-off costs to get to the 55. So that's the group-wide saving. Now, on the dilapidations, we've got a reserve of 10 million for the dilapidations costs. And I'm assuming that that would be sufficient to meet the dilapidations costs of exiting City Hall. So that effectively is not part of, it's outside of the 55 million.
Okay, and so the only other cost then out of the 55, I need to, well, there is no other cost, so that's my saving over 5 years. So what's the one-off savings and what's reoccurring then? What would be in terms of the budget that you're taking into account? So what's the, not the recurring, because I might, because as Mary rightly said, I'm facing a budget crisis. What can I put towards the budget savings of next year? Not one off cost.
If we look just at, first of all, for the GLA alone, if you disentangle from that 55 million the assumed rent we negotiate with TfL for Palestra, but also the rent that the GLA would pay GLAP as the owner of the crystal. So the savings then become 31.5 million over that 5 year period. So on average, that becomes just over 6 million per annum. So I would say the ongoing full year savings from the proposal to exit the City Hall would be some 6 million per annum.
So
and that would be ongoing.
So for next year in the budget, if you reach all the milestones from the planning consent, the moving out the building, is 6 million gets contributed to next year's budget. That's the saving for next year's budget.
Well, there's a decision to be made around that, but essentially the savings, of course, don't occur until December of next year, so there'd only be a part year saving in 21-22 as against in 22-23 onwards. Then the full year saving of 6 million would then arise. There's obviously discussions to be had around how we would credit the overall saving that would emerge and take the money that will become saved, which will need to be part of the budget deliberations.
So really, 3 million and 3 million is I could take that into account in terms of both those financial years if I didn't use the one-off expenditure to help me and support me in my budget.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
I just want to get to the bottom line. What would make a contribution to our budget next year? Because I misunderstood you. I thought you were referring to 12 million, but I can see where that 12 million is over the longer period. But really, the two things I should focus on is the 3 million savings for next year's budget, making a contribution to that, because that's half of 6 million, and then the 3 million after for a full year saving, because I've already taken that 50%. I can't have that twice, can I? You'd be telling me off about that. You'd be saying, actually, that's a 151 action. You can't do that in your budget. That'd be a bit Mickey Mouse, wouldn't it? So I can only take into account 50% and 50% of both those 2 years.
just to clarify, obviously, that the saving would emerge from December 21, so you're looking at more like a quarter of the 6 million rather
50%.
than.
Okay.
And it's only be the 6 million would become a full year saving in 22-23 and then onwards.
That's very useful in terms of clarifying some of those issues. Am I right in financial accounting terms that I shouldn't take into account any of those ongoing savings, whether it's the quarter, 50% or 3/4 the following year? I shouldn't be taking that into account in terms of a third year because they won't exist. They're already out the budget.
I mean, once the savings are made, they are fundamental, ongoing throughout. So they'll be, in the base budget, ongoing forever.
They're built into the base budget.
6 million
but they don't
saved forever.
But they don't figure in numbers terms. I'm not disputing why you've taken the 5 years. I'm talking about now accounting for in terms of my budget making. I can't account for those. They're in the base budget. They're in the base budget. There's not a budget line that says I can cut it in year 3 because it's gone. I've already cut it. So it's 2 years I've got to concentrate on in terms of those issues. And then I've got a substantial number of one-offs. Just remind us of those one-off expenditure that I can only spend once. And actually, I wouldn't necessarily want to spend more on my budget because it just stores up problems for the future. So after all those issues of what we've worked out what it is, so I'm still working on it's sorry, let's be clear. So we're still working on 6 million for years 1 and 2, with a quarter coming in year 1 and the remainder coming in year 2, that I can change the base budget and cut those out because the savings that we're going to generate by making this move.
Yes, so
Okay. Right.
Simplistically, what we would be doing is taking a saving of 1.5 million in 21-22 as the savings that would emerge at that point, and thereafter there'd be 6 million of savings that would then arise. However, the other thing I'd just add to is that's obviously looking at the GLA only. It excludes the element of the rental income that will be paid by the GLA to GLAP and TfL. So overall, the savings across the group remain at that 55 million over the 5 years. So, essentially looking at a much higher level of circa 11 million per annum.
What I'm trying to do is get down and drive down. What's the impact on the budget that Mary, she quite clearly, said, and I've heard it said before by others, that this is a contribution in terms of the revenue budget process and the financial gap we face. I get that. I want to get to the hard figures of what they would be in year 1 and year 2. I then want to understand, so what's the one-off figure? What's the final one-off figure? If I take those out of the equation, what's the final one-off sort of lump sum have I got to play with in terms for use in the GLA family or in the GLA? What is that figure?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Len.
Okay,
Sorry.
let me go back to in my own baby language so I can understand this. I've taken away the savings towards the contribution towards the revenue budget process of what arises from this proposal. So I've excluded those. I'm then left with a sum of money, which is out of the 55, which I think is that real money. What is the one-off lump sum left behind in that calculation? Is that over 5 years? What's the real hard cash of one-offs am I left with that I can use to spend only once?
Sorry, perhaps I'm...
Okay, we're going to try again because I'm not going to give up here, and if my colleagues will just persevere with me because I'm going to pursue this. So, I have got, Mary has said, this proposal will help us save jobs and jobs and services. I get that. I understand that. Okay, we've already just talked about, we've just gone through what is the saving that we can put into next year's budget, bottom line, in terms of cash savings. You've told me it's a quarter of what it is. We've also just agreed that that's only really, in financial terms and accounting terms of budget making, I can only take that out of that part year process, which you've told me is a quarter, And then I've got 3/4 I can take out in year 2 of budget making. I can put that, cut that as savings, right? You've just told me that, and you gave me a figure for that. That leaves me with a remaining sum. What I'm unclear, what is that remaining sum of one-off money is? Is that still calculated over a 5-year period, or is that calculated over my 2-year period? What's the cash sum that's left behind that can be used by the GLA, resulting from these proposals?
So yeah, on a full year basis, so in 22-23, the figure we're looking at is 6 million. And in terms of it, just trying to put that into what would that really mean, going back to some of the earlier answers to questions, assuming that were to be all taken from staff, that would be equivalent to about 100 staff. So, the contribution to the GLA, the pressures on GLA spend, is potentially, enormous. You're looking at, significant defence of jobs there.
I get that, and I've got that, I've banked that, I've moved on now. What is the remaining one-off sum of cash left behind out of this 55 million that will go into the budget of, as a financial figure? What are you suggesting that would be?
For the GLA Mayor's budget,
Yeah.
we're looking at the sum of 31.5 million over the 5-year period to December 26.
So why would you do that over a 5-year period? I don't know. It's one-off monies. How would that? Surely, as a result of these proposals, that's not a real figure, is it? Then it's not a figure that's going to go into the budget line, because that budget line. So once we've done this proposal, the one-off expenditure left to me to spend on whatever I might want to spend, that goes into the piggy bank or we use it, is what? It can't be over 5 years. It has to be a one-off sum. It's what's that figure that you're
that figure.
Is it 31 million then? It's because I think the 5 years is a bit confusing. I get the 5 years, why you're actually basing it in terms of where you are, but what's the financial figure that I'm left with to play with once I've made my assumptions about my base budgets and what I can cut and what I can't cut is in years 1 and 2. What's the sum, the financial sum that I've got?
In each year, on average, it would be some £6 million. That would be the contribution that would be there, that would be, wouldn't otherwise arise if we didn't do this proposal.
So you've calculated, so it's going to be 6 million per year for one-off expenditure, nothing to do with my base budget, that will accrue if I don't spend it, which will accrue in the GLA account for the mayor to use as he wants. And by the end of 5 years, because I might spend something before, but I might squirrel it away, I would have 31 million. Okay, right, thank you. I'm sorry it was a bit painful for everyone, but I think we do need to understand what we're playing with here and what the stakes are. Okay, back to you, Susan. I think you're in the middle of your questioning still.
I was, Chairman, but I think you've asked a couple of the next ones, but it doesn't matter, it's all flowing. If I can go back, David, you mentioned 200k for fees. Now, when anybody charges the GLA or anybody else for anything, they put in zeros. So those fees will be specifically to whom?
Well, we obviously need to go through a contracting procurement process if the mayor decides to proceed with the proposal. The works that we're anticipating, the cost of those works, will be substantial, and therefore there would need to be a proper procurement process, which we'd need to launch at the appropriate juncture.
Yeah, and you think 200k would easily cover that, do you?
Well, that was the estimate we built in at the start of the consultation process. I mean, we obviously need to review that. Depends obviously on the nature of the work. I think the costs of the 5 million are probably on the more generous side. The fee element, I don't want to negotiate fee levels, in a public forum. I'd obviously want to try and knock those down. So, but there obviously is scope potentially within the 5 million if the fee costs came in higher to look at that potentially trading off if fees came in at a higher level.
Okay, I mean, all of us are very aware that everything is a movable feast, and we're being asked in a consultation where there are key things missing, to quote again, where still things are being worked out and unclear. Just now to ask, Ricardo, can we all please see the modelling on the rental market that you were discussing earlier?
Yes, we can take that away and share what we can on some of that early assessment that was done.
And you'll get that sent to us, will you?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Chairman, I'll leave it at that. I've got obviously loads more questions on other subjects. The problem is, Chairman, there's so many things up in the air. All of us have got so many questions that aren't always being answered. Thank you at the moment.
I just want to clarify with members before I go to the next session of questioning. Is Assembly Member Sahota, is your question relating to those set of questions that Assembly Member Hall has raised, or does it relate to the next set of questions? It's a yes or no.
It raised question number 9.
Okay, I'll bring you in then. Unmesh Desai, does your questions relate to the questions that Assembly Member Hall raised, or later? No. Fine. Assembly Member Shah, does your questions relate to this section or the next section?
It does relate to this section, and that is about the 8 million figure we've been given. The question is, can you give us assurance that this is a realistic figure and not part of the moving feast, in that you are confident that the figure will absorb all relevant costs, including construction, fitting out, which is fixtures and furniture, fees that we've been talking about, and relocation of staff? Because when you look at alternatives 1 and 2, for example, for ground floor, the two costs probably aren't comparable at all, looking at 2-chamber solution and stuff like that. So how confident you are that you will not exceed 8 million?
Thank you, Navin. I mean, I've looked at this really, really carefully, and obviously it's worked in detail that Ricardo and Simon in particular did initially. But most importantly, I'm somebody who makes sure that we actually can afford this and actually make estimates that remain prudent. The worst thing we can have is these costs overspending. So, as part of kicking the tyres with the estimates that Simon and Ricardo pulled together, we also engaged Avison Young, our property consultants, to verify those costs, which they have done so. So we have a high degree of confidence those numbers, will work in aggregate. Clearly, there will be detail of changes between the sums we've allocated. There'll be issues. Obviously, we want you to help us on in terms of designing the new crystal, and that will potentially vary the costs, potentially significantly. We need to absorb all that, but I think the 8 million overall is a figure that I'm confident we can contain within. But obviously, we need to pin it all down in detail. It's obviously, as you rightly say, there are degrees of unknowns at this point until we can finalise designs and ultimately, of course, tender for some of the works.
Chair, can I just reinforce what David has said? Because we have, and in the limited time that we have had, which we've talked about, we as officers have done our absolute best to cost out what we believe to be the realistic costs associated with this proposal. We would not have, supported as officers the launch of the consultation otherwise. And I know Assembly Member Hall keeps saying I've said that there are key things missing from the finances. I think what I actually said is that there are key questions unanswered as we're at week 4 of the consultation. What we have always done is be able to, as David said, kick to the tyres. We got to the 8 million as the amount linked to the launch, while with taking in everything that we think we should be taking into that cost base. We've also taken in on top of that, actually, it's it's in the consultation, but on top of that, we've taken in the possible cost as well of in fact paying for 3 buildings for some period of next year. Palestra, the Crystal and still City Hall, as we go through all the decanting process. That's been taken into account as well. So we worked very hard to think about making sure that all the costs were properly landed going into the consultation, because it would have been wrong of us to do anything else. That doesn't mean to say, as we're saying, that as we go through this, we will have to rework those costs. But our assumption is that there may be some reallocation of costs between pots, as it were, but that we will come in under that 8 million. We couldn't have launched the consultation if we did on that basis, if that's not what we think as a set of professionals. Just want to make that clear.
Assembly Member Pidgeon, do you want to begin your set of questions?
Thank you very much. What I'd like to know is, have any discussions been held with the broadcast provider as to the feasibility and sort of broadcast abilities from the Crystal? Because that's so important to our work and also, I guess, promoting the Mayor's work. And that doesn't come cheaply. So I wonder if you could tell us what discussions and what additional costs you have put in for that to be set up at the Crystal.
Yeah, Simon will take that if that's okay.
So we have been in discussions with our current broadcaster. They have been looking to see what of your current kit is transferable. Some of it's quite old, but some of it is very new. We've recently installed a lot of new cameras, for example, in committee rooms 4 and 5, which you haven't had the opportunity to use yet because of the situation from March. So they're brand new. So there's an inventory of kit which is can be taken across. The broadcasters have an appointment this afternoon, actually, to go and do some detailed on-site study. We've had serious conversations with them prior to that. So following that site visit and the other work they've been doing, I will then get a report back. But all this is on the basis that we will provide the same level of facility for you in the Crystal that you have in City Hall. And you'll be aware that our broadcasters know very well how you work. They've been with us a long time and understand your needs from that point of view.
Okay, and this will also include ISDN lines for doing radio interviews and the like?
Yes, because
and
we have those at the moment.
'Cause, I mean, journalists may not wish to come out to the Crystal in the way they come to City Hall, so being able to do down-the-line interviews will be increasingly important. Will those facilities be in place?
They will. Those are the kind of facilities we have at City Hall, and we will be replicating them at the Crystal.
So within the 8 million, what cost have you got at the moment that you've allocated, your estimate for the broadcasting costs?
We don't have a precise figure at the moment.
So it's not in the 8 million?
There is an allowance for it, both in the 8 million and in the 2 million, but we haven't got a precise cost at this moment.
Okay. I think it's really important that we get that. Also, my next question is, what have GLAP and the GLA Group done in order to attract potential corporate tenants that's obviously for the existing Crystal building?
So I'll take this one, Mary, thanks. Prior to going into lockdown due to COVID, we had been undertaking a number of discussions with potential occupiers of the building. And the key thing for us at the Crystal is ensuring that whoever the occupier is and the use being proposed, that it chimes with the aspirations for the area as far as regeneration is concerned. So we had started work on that exercise, and then that was impacted, those discussions were impacted by recent events and the consideration that we've been given to relocating City Hall to the Crystal. So all I can say is those conversations are on hold, pending the consultation. But it is very, present in our minds that the Crystal, as it is currently under occupied. and finding that long-term commercial or other use is sort of critical, and this is a potential use.
But did you have in mind anyone who might be suitable to fit with your regeneration plans for the area?
Yes, but not in a position to disclose that publicly, because clearly, there are commercial considerations here.
Right, so you potentially had someone lined up who could move into the Crystal and pay a rental income.
So no, we were in the process of considering a number of options for the Crystal, linked to the regenerative aspirations for the area. So I mean, there's lots of housing development happening. There's the Crystal at the moment is set up to be used as an exhibition hall. There are potentially other uses, a number of uses, office space, for example, that it could have been used for. So we had been considering a number of options at varying stages with different counterparties.
Okay, and are we able to see the documentation around that and what you were estimating for rents, depending on the type of use of the building and who you might expect to come in? Can we see some of that early work that you were doing, Ricardo?
So we will take that away and consider what we're able to share.
That would be helpful. Obviously, I don't need the name of a company or something, but I think to show the sort of work and to understand what sort of income you're planning, because clearly potentially changing planning permission was something you must have been considering as the owner of this building, because it currently only has permission for this exhibition space.
Yes, but again, if we were to engage and sell the building to a counterparty, whatever deal we managed to agree, we would pass that responsibility over to them. So it wouldn't be for us to take on that, that planning risk.
Right, so you were looking before at selling the building, and now that was what you were considering.
So there are a number of options. As I said, one option may have been to sell the building for a residential development, for example. In which case, as GLA Land and Property, we would have passed on the responsibility and liability for the building, and it would have been dependent on the negotiation and whatever terms we would have arrived at.
Okay, well, it'd be useful for us to see those options and to understand the sort of figures and things you were looking at there. I had two other things that just throughout the discussion we've had this morning, I would just like on record. One from Simon Grinter. You keep saying the capacity at the Crystal for the public gallery will be lower. Can you just put on record for our transcript how many the current chamber will hold in the public gallery, please?
The current gallery at City Hall holds 250, and the design at the moment for the Crystal, at its very high level, would be for 150.
Great, I just wanted to make sure that was in our transcript for looking back. And the other thing that I have been trying to get hold of, and for some reason doesn't seem to be available, is at the moment City Hall attracts a huge amount of commercial filming. We know the James Bond film, we got over £100,000 for having that filmed at City Hall. We know things like The Apprentice are filmed there. I would like to know how much income we generate from all these filming and other commercial activities at City Hall, because much of that will not be able to be replicated out at the Crystal. Is that something that officers could pull together, please?
I could certainly pull that together. It varies from year to year, but I could certainly give you a printout, say, for the last 5 years that you've.
I think it'd be helpful to get an understanding of filming, other events and things to work out, because that's a loss of income, which I think we need to take into account when we're looking at this whole proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, are there any members who want to come in on this section before we move on to the next question from Assembly Member Lonka?
Yes, Chair, if I may.
Councillor, I don't know why I've got councillor in my head. Assembly Member Prince is talking to too many councillors. Sorry.
I know the feeling. This is a question. Obviously, it's now out that there was a possibility that we were looking at selling the Crystal for redevelopment. Well, if we were to have done that as we're doing with TfL, if we were to do that as a JV or a JD, whichever phrase you want to use, that would have provided once a massive income, but also could have provided an enormous revenue stream for the GLA. So I don't know whether Ricardo, you want to go with that, or David, you might want to come in. But if that could have been redeveloped for residential, that would be an enormous amount of money that we could have made from that, which I would say would far outweigh the potential saving that we are making on the GLA's current building. Looks to me like we've missed a trick. Ricardo, do you want to comment on the possibility of that being a residential development? And then David, perhaps you could comment on the revenue cost. You know, we call it opportunity cost, as you know, in basic economics. Ricardo.
Yeah, sure. So looking at the Crystal as a residential development comes with a number of considerations. Not just the potential receipt that we would get, and you know, I committed earlier to Assembly Member Pigeon to share what options assessment we had done previously for the Crystal. We need to think about, you know, long-term regenerative benefit. We need to think about footfall, and need to think about having a balance of uses across the docks. So, you know, the site that is closest to the docks, Thameside West, is currently going through the planning system to deliver over, you know, 2,000 homes. There's a development just across the basin at Silvertown Quays looking at a further 3,000 homes. So, you know, we need to ensure that there is a balance of uses. It's not just about looking at the initial receipt that we would get through a fire sale by raising money in disposing of the Crystal. And were it to be sort of a joint venture arrangement, I mean, each joint venture is bespoke in its own right, and it, you know, we need to consider a business case for that. But what I would say is entering into a joint venture to deliver a residential development with some long-term return for the GLA is very uncertain in the current market, and there is clearly you know, certain risks associated with that that we would need to fully put time to and diligence to understand. And given the timescales that we're working to here, you know, it may well be an option, but weighed against the savings that we would make through relocating to City Hall and the effort and time required to develop such a proposal, it just doesn't fit with where we currently are in considering the approach that's on the table.
David, you want to have a stab at the potential revenue loss as a result of not... I mean, I would imagine that in the case of a building like the Crystal, you would just knock it down and re-provide, and obviously you can go quite high in that area. I had a walk round there the other day, and I think everybody in the building agrees that housing is the big issue. Affordable housing is the big issue. Wouldn't it be wonderful to knock that down and build a great development with maybe 35, even 50% affordable housing in an area where affordable housing is very hard to come by because of all the £1 million apartments? What do you think we would have lost on the revenue side of that, David, do you reckon?
Well, in theory, Keith, obviously, you're right. If we were there as being property speculators to have that view, then I'm sure there would be, you know, an income stream be very attractive. But as Ricardo says, that doesn't seem to me to be a feasible practical option that we would pursue.
Okay, so I think you have, in the past, Mary, you indicated that you'd done some kind of a property review. Sorry, could you remind me when you said you looked at the estate before? When we were talking right at the beginning, and I said about...
I think what I said, Assemblymember Prince, was when I arrived 18 months ago.
Yeah.
There was some discussion going on about whether or not we should take additional space because we were spilling out of City Hall, which I was anxious that we did not proceed with without some further consideration. And at that point, there was a little bit of a conversation about the upcoming break.
Right.
But
So you haven't, in your time here, then done an estate review?
No, I mean.
Really? Okay, I'll take that answer. I'll take the answer.
GLA point of view, we have City Hall and Union Street. That's what we had as we came out of the lockdown.
Well, no, that's not true, is it, Mary? Because we have in the Excel sheet that you sent me about the buildings that we have City Hall, we have part of Union Street, we have plot 5 Popular High Street, we have corner of Atlantis Avenue and Amanda Way, we have the Crystal, Compressor House, whole building, whatever that is, 20 Newbury Street, Royal Victoria Dock Western End, Royal Building, whole premises, which is Rich Mixed Cultural Foundation, RAD Phase 1 and Building 1000, according to what you've sent over to us. Now, they're buildings that we have an interest in. And and so that's more than just 2 buildings. So you're saying you haven't, in your time here, done an estate review?
I haven't done an estate review, no,
Right.
links to our accommodation. David might want to pick up on that because David and Ricardo, that's much more their area in terms of the property that we have and why we use it. My concern is what we use to accommodate our staff. And that's been City Hall and Union Street up to this point, with a little bit of room in the Crystal for the Royal Docks team in recent times.
But are you not the CEO? Are you not in charge of the whole business? Do you not look after the whole of the GLA family? Are you not numero uno?
I am the most senior officer at the GLA, as you know.
Yeah. So in that case, would it have not occurred to you to, like, once you, I mean, when I go into a shop, I know it's not the same ball game, but when I go into a shop, I do a stock take to see what I've got.
Yes, well, but as you can see from that spreadsheet, the buildings that we have are used for a range of purposes, some of which actually are leased out to others.
Well, I didn't want to get into this, Chair, because I was going to let it go, but I mean, we've got this thing called whole building, whatever that is, and we've got whole premises, whatever that is, and then we've got RAD Phase 1 and Building 1000. They're all let out for like either £1 or £0, so peppercorn rents, with very long leases, with no reviews. That doesn't make sense. Why would you let something out for a 200-year lease to the London Borough of Newham for nothing with no review? Why would you do that? And why would you not know that?
I think Ricardo needs to be able to give him the chance to answer.
He does.
Okay, so the spreadsheet that you've seen, Assembly Member Prince, shows the buildings where we do have either a freehold or leasehold interests, office spaces at various sizes, and ultimately, you know, through sort of predecessor bodies, lots of these leases have been inherited and have been novated over to the GLA where they currently sit, and, you know, more specifically GLA Land and Property. As Mary says, these buildings are being used for a range of uses, but the spreadsheet that you've seen shows those that are currently suitable for office accommodation. The thing to bear in mind here as well is most of the assets within GLAP are further east than the Royal Docks in outer London, and the sites that we haven't included on the schedule are the ones that are either appropriate for housing, large-scale housing development, which is one of the primary purposes you alluded to earlier for GLAP and the GLA, or for other sort of industrial uses. So, you know, the spreadsheet that you've seen reflect the sites that are currently available, not available, but the sites that are currently used for office accommodation, but they've predominantly been discounted.
So, Ricardo.
Ricardo, we've lost you.
Sorry.
Currently been discounted, and then you went quiet.
Apologies. So they're currently being discounted, partly because of their size, and, you know, going back to the discussion earlier on this session, where Assembly members have alluded to the potential for staff to be brought closer together. Adopting a strategy taking on some of these sites for office use means that staff will be more dispersed. So, you know, as far as a strategy is concerned, they're not deemed suitable.
Right, so in fact what you're saying is the property portfolio is far greater, and you haven't done a review of the property portfolio. That just beggars belief. But I'll take that. I mean, people in London will take that as well. But you've missed a trick here, haven't you, really, Ricardo? You know, had you done a property review, had you identified when Siemens moved out, which was some months ago now, that there was potential that that could have been redeveloped for residential. One, the mayor could have plugged the massive hole that he's already got in his finances. Two, he could have provided the houses that the Londoners desperately need, that he's always going on about. So you've missed two policy opportunities there because you've not been on the case. I'm not blaming you, Ricardo, but Mary, that's down to you, mate. You really missed a trick there, haven't you?
I don't think we've missed a trick, Assembly Member Prince. I mean,
you've got the opportunity of bringing it up. You've missed the opportunity to look at bringing in a very sizable one-off capital income, or you've missed the opportunity to get a very sizable revenue income. David's already accepted that. Or you've missed the opportunity of providing the much-needed houses and homes that the people of London need. Which one of those three are you denying you haven't missed? Because you have my books, you've missed all three of them.
So I just want to play back what Ricardo has said. The first is that, in the latter end of last year, before we knew about COVID, he and his team were exploring options for the Crystal. He said that very clearly. And he also said to Assembly Member Pigeon that he would share as much as he can within the commercial confidentiality of that information. So that's what the team was doing. It's exactly the right thing to be doing. The reason, remember, that we bought this building from Siemens in the first place back in 2016 was to retain it as a strategic asset in the development of the Royal Docks. And as Ricardo has said, that means thinking about it very carefully. Then we've got COVID. We're all decanted to our homes and elsewhere, and we rethink, I think quite rightly, the upcoming break clause on City Hall. And as Ricardo said, with this proposal now on the table, his team is not doing any further active work on opportunities at the Crystal. And even if they were, I think they'd be finding it difficult to find people to talk to about at the moment because everything is so uncertain. But we have paused those as we then consider and evaluate whether or not we should move to take this break. I'm very happy, and Ricardo's already said it, but I'll say it again, that as we pull all of this together for the mayor in advance of the decision, we can also make sure that, where we were in discussions before COVID broke on the Crystal, what some of the financial advantages of those things, had we been able to see them through, might have been. We can put that all in. It all has to be in, has to be part of the full picture. But so, I don't accept that the team weren't thinking through plans for the Crystal, because they were. But as we know, this thing has arrived. It has changed our world, not only at the GLA, but beyond. And that's why we're now considering, this substantial change of plan, I accept, in a very relatively short period of time. But I think it is our duty to do so.
Colleagues,
I will finish here, Chair, but I just want to summarise. So what you're saying is that in the 4 years that you've had Siemens, it didn't occur to anyone that actually we could make a massive receipt, and I've said everything about what the benefits of doing something else with the Crystal would be. That didn't occur to you in the 4 years, and it's taken a pandemic before you think about the break clause with the GLA City Hall site. Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Siemens leased back the building. Siemens leased back the building after we had bought it. So they were present in the building till sometime last year. They did not move out in 2016. But you know all of that. We've laid that out.
Thank you. Just to alert Assembly members, look, I'm aiming to finish this item by 2 p.m. and then we will work out how we will do with the other business, probably in consultation with party leads. I want to bring in Assembly Member Onka Sahota.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Mary, just remind me, who bought Siemens in 2016?
I'm going to have to... so who bought the building?
Yes, and why?
Why did Siemens sell?
When and why did we buy it?
So we bought the building in 2016, and that was partly and leased it back to Siemens, who, as Mary said...
I can't hear you.
who, as Mary said, remained in the building until 2019. So the reason for Siemens selling the building, as I think...
I want to know, why did we buy it and when did we buy it in 2016?
So we bought it in the autumn of 2016, and the reason we bought it is to retain it as a strategic asset within the docks. The alternative being, so firstly, through the lease arrangement that we had with Siemens, they had to offer the GLA the first right of refusal to acquire the site, so we took that up. And secondly, the reason we took it up is, as Mary said, we wanted to retain it as a strategic asset within the docks so that we could control what use was potentially going to be brought forward in the docks, as we're responsible for bringing forward development across the docks, so that we had an element of control. Okay. So that was the strategic reason for acquiring it.
In 2019, Siemens said to you they want to give up their lease, and you said you agreed a figure with them. What was your thinking then, that when you were buying back a lease from them, what would you do with the property? What was your thinking at that time? Why did we have to wait till May of this year before you start thinking about what to do when you bought back a lease from Siemens rather?
So we didn't start thinking about what we would do with the building in May of this year. We bought the building with the intention of looking at options that would increase or improve the regenerative benefit of the Royal Docks and attract people to the Royal Docks, jobs, homes, footfall. So, that was the reason why we bought the building. And as I've said, and as Mary said previously, we were considering a number of options. We hadn't sort of sat still following the acquisition of the building and taking it over outright.
So when in 2019 did Siemens give back the lease?
So the specific date escapes me. We can certainly confirm specifics if that would be helpful. But I think it was roughly halfway through the year, halfway through 2019 calendar year.
Okay, it'll be helpful if you could let us know. But let's take it that June 2019 was at the time when they gave it back to you. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, and what are the estimated benefits of moving City Hall to Docklands in terms of increased business and cultural activities in the area? What are the advantages of us moving there?
So, as I said earlier, the intention for the Royal Docks is to have a mix of uses, and to the overarching goal being to increase footfall. Now, we've got significant levels of housing being developed across the docks. We've got significant levels of sort of non-residential commercial space and office space being delivered across the docks. There is a cultural offer and a venue such as the Excel. Again, providing that mix of uses. What perhaps isn't at the Crystal. So there's currently no sort of civic uses. And again, in sort of bringing people to the docks, there are the benefits are twofold. So it is, if there were to be sort of a civic office, for London's government at the Crystal, you're bringing people into the area who wouldn't normally come into the area. You're also helping to raise the profile of the area. This is the GLA and the Mayor will have a presence at the docks for at least the next 20 years. So this isn't a short-term venture. And, similar to, the benefit of, City Hall as it currently is when it was developed 20 odd years ago, there is the potential for a similar regenerative benefit as we've seen around Tower Bridge crystallising in the docks. So ultimately, that is also the potential ambition and opportunity here.
Okay. Is there a value attached to the government of London being in iconic buildings, in an iconic setting? Is there any value attached to that?
So value in terms of
value in terms of the economic activity, how London is perceived across the world, how people think of London?
So, I mean, that plays into the strategic case that we've made here for the proposed move. And if you're referencing Assembly Member Sahota, some kind of specific assessment where we look at placing a value on having a civic office in a prominent regeneration area, then as I've set out, we think the benefits are quite clear. But if there's anything more specifically that you'd suggest that we look at in that regard, then happy to consider them.
Well, what I was more concerned about, of course, that having the seat of London government, right, in a building which, for example, with the drop of the London Bridge there, may be more valuable than having it in the Crystal.
Well, we're getting into an objective space, I feel. But
I'm glad it's objective rather than subjective.
But what I will say is, there is an international airport in the area. There's significant levels of development happening across the area. We've got, a well-renowned venue at Excel, and there is a program of work to attract and increase footfall within the Royal Docks.
In the perception of the world, right, will London be perceived better having the City Hall in the shadows of London Bridge as compared to Crystal?
Well, this area of London, I mean, I'll stop talking in a moment for others to come in if they wish to, but we've seen the legacy and regenerative benefit of the Olympics being in East London in Stratford, which is only a few miles down the road. And as I said earlier, the GLA and the Mayor, for as long as it's in existence, will be at the docks for a very long time, and certainly for the next 20 years at least. This is a key regeneration area for us.
Mary, do you think that this London Assembly should be sitting in an iconic building?
So I think the Assembly should be sitting in the building that works for them and become the image of London government. So, it's fair to say, isn't it, that 20 years ago, London government wasn't at Tower Bridge.
No, it wasn't. It was in County Hall.
Yes, but that picture against Tower Bridge is the last 20 years. Of course, this would be different. It's probably the biggest difference of all, isn't it? This sort of shift in location and surroundings. But again, people tell me, in fact, Simon was one of the people into City Hall 20 years ago when, the whole area looked entirely different. And, that is part of this, helping do for the Royal what the GLA started to do 20 years ago for the Tower Bridge area. It will be different, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say we can't establish that, a new iconic image for London government at the new location. That's what we've done over the last 20 years. We could do it again should this decision be to move.
And just one more thing. Once we move into the Crystal, will the rateable value of the property go up?
David, can you answer that one?
Obviously, there needs to be an assessment of that, and ultimately the rates value is driven by the rental value, which again, obviously, is something that we have to finalise as part of the financial assessment. The figure that we put in at the moment, the assumption of the rent that the GLA would pay GLAP, I would suggest is probably likely to be on the high side, and obviously the same level of rates is also then applied. So I suspect, perhaps in the short term, there would actually be potentially a reduction in the rates that we'd actually pay by moving to the Crystal, but that needs to be a professional assessment made by Newham's valuers.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, let's bring in Assembly Member Berry. Oh, sorry, Umesh Desai has got his hand up. Umesh Desai, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yep, I can hear you. Yep.
Chair, yeah, I mean, look, I know this area like the back of my hand. I was a member of Newham's Strategic Development Committee that gave permission to many of these developments, Excel and so on. I've lived in the area since 1982, and that part of Newham has got a rather colourful history. But what I also don't like, and obviously the constituency member, anything that brings jobs and housing to my part of London, I would of course more than welcome it. But what I also don't like is fanciful claims that are not backed by evidence. So, Ricardo, if I could ask you, I mean, you say that the two advantages of the City Hall being relocated to the Royal Docks is that it would bring in people into the area and it would raise the profile of the area. Now, I would actually, strongly refute that. A lot of these developments actually predate the Olympics. It was down to the political leadership, both at London level, cutting across parties, may I add, and at local level, that is responsible for many of the developments that we've seen in the Royal Docks area. Thinking that went back to the late 80s, when City Airport was known as Stolpert, and so on. So it was a combination of local and London-wide political leadership that is responsible for many of these developments. What evidence is there that it will raise the profile of the area? The area already has a high profile. Without City Hall even being there, ABP moved in. Okay, now with developers in China, let's take a rather uncertain turn. But all the developments that are there were there before the debate around City Hall moving. The housing developments are already taking place. So can you name me, Ricardo or Mary, one development that would be happening as a result of City Hall moving to the Royal Docks area? What I'm putting to is that all these developments, and I'm really pleased because it's my part of London, are already taking place, regardless of whether City Hall moves to the Royal Docks area. Give me some concrete evidence how a move of City Hall would actually specifically benefit that part of London.
So you're right, Assembly Member Desai, and I wasn't disputing that these developments, long-term developments, were already in train. The point I was trying to make is about a mixture of uses within the docks. We can't have an area which is entirely comprised of residential-led developments, and this is partly why we've set up a team jointly with Newham to have some resource on site to look at broader regeneration of the area. So yes, these are long-term developments. Plans have been in place for some time, but the next step is to look at how do we further go about bringing people to the docks who wouldn't normally come to the docks to spend money, to spend time, and actually having a development, having an area that is just entirely comprised of residential development, just wouldn't be appropriate. So the broader aspiration here is to have that mix of uses.
I'm bringing in Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you, Chair. I appear to like Unmesh Desai's constituency more than he does. I actually think it's a wonderful place where we may be moving to. I just and also to take up Unmesh Desai's challenge about which developments are moving there. Of course, the Silvertown Tunnel is moving there. So, I mean, it's not as though there's nothing happening in the area. Can I just ask, perhaps Mary Hartley, is it more important for City Hall to have a view, or the Home of London government, to have a view of the past or of the future? We very much have a view of the past at the moment through windows that don't clean very well. What was your view of that?
Well, my view, Assembly Member Boff, is, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, I think. We are facing some financial challenges. We have a lease break ahead of us. And actually, if we don't take this one up, we've only got a lease till 2026 anyway. I mean, we haven't said much about that today, but, we're going to be in this situation in 5 years' time, if not now. When looking at the accommodation in the group available to us as a possible alternative, the Royal Crystal at the Royal Docks is the main one, and I think that it does offer an opportunity to take on again a role that the GLA took on 20 years ago, and to look to the next 20 years. Simon tells me that we should be able to clean the windows at the Crystal more easily than the ones at City Hall. Seeing you mentioned the windows, but I mean, that's really, that's really not at the heart of this. But I think it is an opportunity. And, if we don't take this opportunity now, if the Mayor decides not to move, we do still have an issue about what we do in 2026. And as we know, City Hall is a iconic building. I think no one disputes that. But there are day-to-day issues of living with the building that when we're all there, we are reminded of too. And so, there is a question about its suitability as a building longer term for us. So that's my view to your question.
Thank you very much. Now I want to move to, sorry, Amesh, did I cut you off, or as you were continuing question, had you finished?
No, I'll finish, right? Just to say that I will move heaven and earth to get jobs and housing to my part of London, but I want some strong evidence that a move, of City Hall would help the roll dogs. So I note what Asylum Boff has said, but I've spent the last 20 years fighting for jobs, housing to come to that part of the roll dogs. So I've got a very strong history of which I'm proud.
Okay. Let's bring in Assembly Member, where am I? Sian Berry, and she's going to be asking questions around staff retention and morale issues in relation to the move. Assembly Member Berry.
Very much, Chair. And just before I move to that topic, can I just ask very quickly, I imagine that Ricardo is the person who would know this. Am I not right in thinking that the public safety zone for City Airport actually extends into the south of the site, restricting its use for residential development?
Yes.
There you go. Another good reason to not think about that, I think, especially as the airport itself is also producing lots of noise at the same time as safety risk. So I wanted to ask about staff and how they are being considered in this move. I know we've discussed in depth already where they live, but as I understand it, staff are not being asked about their views on this, their feelings about this. The potential for having to work at home is that being surveyed to staff individually to get an idea of if we can only maintain a certain number of people in the office at any time, whether that will increase or decrease staff well-being. How much consultation is going on that side of things in terms of their morale?
Staff are being consulted, Assembly Member Berry. We're consulting yourselves as Assembly Members, we're consulting all staff. And as I laid out right at the beginning of this meeting, there was an awful lot of whole engagement plan in terms of getting information to staff and allowing lots of dialogue with staff about these proposals. So, and when we summarise the consultation, we'll lay out all of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we aren't surveying people particularly on their morale now. We did a pulse survey probably 6 weeks ago now on how staff were feeling early into lockdown. We have said, and I did confirm this in the letter to Assembly Member Shah on Friday, we are going to survey people on their sort of willingness and appetite to work more from home. We're going to do that. We would be doing that now, but because we're opening up City Hall next week to the first 200, we're surveying at the moment for people who are desperate to get some respite from home working and get into City Hall. That survey closes tomorrow. When that is closed, we'll then open a survey on people's view on more remote working and this expectation that people would do that 2 to 3 days a week. I do want to say a couple of things. The first is, though, that this need for people to work more remotely more often hasn't just suddenly arrived as part of this proposal. We have been working towards this since I arrived, and making good progress towards that. And we had a whole raft of further activity that we would be doing now if we were in our buildings in the normal way. So this is a journey we've been on for some time, which I think staff do recognise. This is an extreme version of home working we're in now. It is absolutely not what we are suggesting going forward. And again, I do think staff largely recognise that. The other thing is members of staff are in very different places. So I have got people who are saying to me, Mary, I am desperate to get back into City Hall because I'm still working with my Surface Pro on my lap, on my bed. Okay, so that I know there are people in that position. And then at the other end, I've got people saying, do I ever have to come back into City Hall again, Mary? Because I can work very effectively. And I've got other people off the spectrum saying, would it be acceptable if I moved away out of London to Assemblymember Hall's point, out of London on a more permanent basis and worked more permanently, largely remotely? So there's a whole spectrum of people whose views I am very confident we will see come through the consultation, but we will do a short survey of people's and try and get a little bit more, tease out that spectrum of people who really can't envisage working from home anymore versus people who actually have think the benefits are such that actually it's what's going to make them stay working at the GLA. And everything in between.
Thank you, Mary. And I think it's that level of complexity that prompted my question, really. I.e., you can't just take an average of people's views. You need to be able to see, where the extremes are, how many are pluses and minuses, and also I think the protected characteristics, how they might vary between people who are totally positive about working at home and people who might not. You can totally see how there's a socioeconomic issue here. People who don't have privileged home lives and maybe, partners who were contributing to a nice roomy home where they've got their own office versus people who are younger, live in houses of multiple occupation, do not have spaces. If those people are going to be discouraged from working at the GLA because in the future they'll be required to work from home the majority of days, that's a potential issue for us. And I want to make sure we're getting as much data as we can and feelings and opinions and this sort of slightly less quantitative thing about, can you cope? Is your home life good enough? We need to get that from the current staff as much as we can, don't we?
Yes, and that is the plan.
Chair, if I may.
Can I just say actually on the protected characteristics, we did some, I think, good work on a draft equalities impact assessment. I think we got that right going into the consultation. And we are, as we must, reviewing that. So in fact, I have got a second meeting with all the chairs of all the staff networks tomorrow as a sort of, again, just after midway review point for their view on our equalities impact assessment. So we're doing that too. One of the So there are people that think this is a good idea, there are people that in the staff, and there are people that think it's a dreadful idea. Of course there are. One group who is very positive about it, among others, are our staff network for staff with disabilities. They think this could really open up some flexibility, not only for them, but for our future recruits in terms of staff with disability. I think they're very positive.
That's certainly some of the feedback we've had from visits to the Crystal, that it's like it's got fewer stairs and more lifts and all that kind of thing. But also, I think the fact that we might be investing more in people's homes to do reasonable adjustments there. So can I ask about that? Because I did read the initial equality impact assessment, and it identified potential impacts on many protected groups, and there were commitments in there to make adjustments and change things to make sure that things were done. Can you go into more detail about the adjustments you'll be making for staff who can't work at home or might have issues with coming in more often? How are you going to do that?
Chair, would it be okay if I ask Charmaine to come in on that? She is on the call, although you haven't announced her.
Yes, I'm happy for it. She's got the information that answers the member's question.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. So, Assembly Member Berry, yes, we have as you have said, I was trying to get in earlier, but Mary was giving a very good answer. We have set out in that equality impact assessment exactly some of those protected characteristics that could be affected. It's not just disability, it's, for example, age, it's around caring responsibilities, potentially, pregnant women, travelling. So there's a whole range there. The intention is to make sure that we are taking feedback from staff through the consultation period. So we've already run one session, as Mary said, for our staff networks in Unison on the equality impact assessment, and we're going to run another. The first one was literally just a day or two after the consultation was announced. So we hope now that they will have had time to read it in some detail. And then tomorrow we'll be taking further feedback. And the adjustments then we then make will be based on the decisions that are taken on the basis of the consultation. So clearly, if we're hearing very strongly through the consultation and maybe through the survey that we have significantly more people asking for adjustments at home, for example, that we've underestimated the number of people who want to work longer at home, then we would consider what that might be and how that would work. That probably should be seen in the backdrop of the support we've already given staff during this period for setting up some home office equipment that was needed. And then for all staff who disclosed a workplace adjustment or a disability, they had a one-to-one call through just at the start of the lockdown period, where we then made an assessment of whether the reasonable adjustment they have needed additional equipment at home. For the majority, actually, it meant that they didn't, but for a few, they needed, for example, a special chair or a height adjustable desk. These weren't, they were very few in number, I think it was less than 5. But the main thing is that we keep that maintained, particularly as we go into the next period and through the next year. There are certainly some staff who will have a different adjustment from maybe working at home than they did if they were in the office. And Simon and I have been working very closely now for a number of months and would, of course, make sure that all those workplace adjustments are replicated in any type of office setting that we have, whether that be Palestra, Union Street or the Crystal.
Can I go back to the just with you, Charmaine, the thing that Mary said about you are asking staff to let you know about problems and how they're feeling. See, what I have in mind is that there needs to be a structured questionnaire where people actually ask. If we are relying on people to proactively think ahead and bring things up about how they might be feeling in the future, we may not capture the people who are less proactive in doing this if we're not sending them a structured questionnaire. Has any kind of structured question gone out to staff about their well-being and under these new patterns of work and commuting?
So that's the pulse survey that Mary covered off earlier.
Was about lockdown, is that not right?
It was about lockdown, but of course it was lockdown and working predominantly at home at that point. So there was lots of feedback about how staff felt about working in isolation for some of them. And on the back of that, we'd already started to set out how some intervention, some support for well-being. We've run a number of well-being taster sessions, and now we followed them up with the actual program. So, for example, how do you have work-life balance and working at home? How do you feel about remote working? Now, we are, I think it's fair to say, in an extreme version of this at the moment, where those who maybe like a balance between going into the office and working at home haven't got that. We are all predominantly at home. So we did commit to rerunning the pulse survey again. Of course, as we open up the building a little bit, as we see, from next week, the first 200, we're going to see some of that easing, hopefully. We know that staff who particularly have difficulties working at home will be able to then self-select to come in. And then this, I think this the additional survey that we're going to run on people's intentions about their work patterns will give us quite a lot of, I think, quantitative and qualitative data, which we've heard through some of our all-staff briefings. Mary, myself and David Munn ran one last week about how people feel. I think that's what you're trying to get to, how they feel. And I think it is a very balanced, we're getting balanced feedback at the moment. There are some people who really enjoy the flexibility that brings. They're more productive. They can see how the technology works for them. For others, they're looking for a different type of pattern, and this extreme version isn't necessarily working for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I mean, I appreciate what you say about the survey done about lockdown, but obviously during lockdown, we've all been employing our very best blitz spirit to get through, and it's not been seen as being something that's permanent. I think there's a very different question that relates to our ability to recruit and retain if this is going to be forever. Because I'm sitting here in my flat today thinking this cannot go on forever myself, and I'm not even that badly off for living space. So I think it is important to make sure we're prompting staff to tell us about this, because it has implications for not only the immediate consequences for the lives of the staff that we have now, but our ability in the future to recruit and retain the right people, the people that we need.
Yeah, a point well made. And I would say that certainly when we've done some work on what talent are looking for when they're joining an organisation, they're definitely looking for flexibility, working flexibly, working in different locations. They're looking for good, reliable, high-spec technology that allows them to connect and collaborate. And I think with the work that we did actually prior to lockdown, in giving them some of that technology does help us to actually attract people. So, but that's not detracting from your point that for some permanent or a majority of a week where you're expected to work from home, which is of course not what we are suggesting. For some, that might be more of a detraction rather than an attraction to join an organisation.
And obviously, I think this is really difficult because we're not going to see the results of this staff survey as an assembly before we have to take a view on this, and we also feel responsible for the staff. So this is difficult for us. I hope you'll be sharing the information as quickly as possible afterwards. And Mary, finally, will you be looking at the results of this and considering whether there might be upward pressure on salaries that might be needed in order to offset any negative effects? Is that something that's been taken into account in the future savings?
I have to say, we're not taking much upward movement on salaries into account in the future, given our savings constraints. So that's my honest answer to you on that. I think
if we can't mitigate by improving that aspect of the job, then we are a bit stuck. There's not much we can do.
I think we need to. Sorry, I've got a printer going off behind me that I can't do anything about. I think, as we've said, we need to understand people's circumstances. We need to understand what we're mitigating against, and then we need to understand the best way to do that. But I wouldn't want any member of staff listening to this, because I suspect we've got lots of people watching, that is going to translate into salary uplifts. I can't see that happening. It might translate into some short-term financial support for people facing much longer commutes or additional costs in other ways. But yeah, we'll have to take that into account. And just to come back, of course, as we get this information from the staff postcode analysis, from this structured survey that we are going to do, we will of course share it with you. Okay. I mean, it'll all be shared because it'll all be part of the further, very, very public process of decision making around this.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Berry makes a very important point about staff consultation. Would it be possible, Mary, if we could see the up-to-date position as we come to sign off our own consultation? Would you be prepared to share it in its interim form so those members can just take that into account of any of their submissions? Would that be possible?
Chair, yes, I will do my best. I'm just thinking about all the timing of all of this, because I suspect some staff will leave it to the last minute to fill in the consultation as well. But whether it's in the run-up to or immediately after, we'll find a way of sharing with you what we can.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm moving on to Assembly Member Joanne McCartney for a set of questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I think some of mine have been answered in the general discussion earlier, but can I just start by thanking Mary and the team for answering the question today. It's been a long meeting and not the easiest one at times. But can I just check via you, Chair, that we could just get some information after the meeting? So can I ask Mary that we actually have a breakdown of current staff at Union Street, City Hall and the Crystal, and then where they are envisaged being decamped to, so we can actually see where staff currently are and where they're going to under the current proposals. And can you just confirm to me that it's only the Assembly and Royal Dutch staff that are going to be based at the Crystal?
So that isn't quite right, Assembly Member McCartney. Yeah. So Assembly staff, yes. Royal Dock staff, we absolutely don't plan to move them, and in fact I think actually Newham wouldn't want them moved either, because as Ricardo says, a lot of that work is done jointly with the borough. The mayor and the mayor's office team will be based at the Crystal. We've been clear about that. And then, as Simon has said, you know, the way we configure the Crystal will also allow us quite a lot of other space for staff, either on the office floors or in the on the ground floor. And the question of who else goes there, you know, where's the corporate management team going to be, where are some of the other directorates going to be, that is still very much up for discussion. And I really don't plan to resolve all of that in detail prior to the mayor taking a decision. I mean, we'll lay out the plans for you as they currently are, as you've asked, absolutely. But I think there's further work to be done ultimately about particularly the Palestra Union Street split as we get further down the line. Our focus at the moment is on the Crystal and seeing what the options are for making the Crystal work.
Okay. Obviously, the Assembly's purpose is to scrutinise the mayor and raise interest, matters of importance for Londoners. And the Assembly is obviously concerned that, if you like, being moved down the river out of the central zone, as it were, will mean that the Assembly will be seen to be less remote. A lot of our work and our relationships with not only the mayor's team but also the wider GLA staff is through, for example, sharing lunch in the canteen, bumping into people in the lift or throughout the building. So I think the issue about the Assembly becoming more remote and isolated is a live issue to us all. And what do you say to that?
So I can see how the concern arises. I recognise the concern. It's the first thing to say. The second thing is to say what I said earlier, which is absolutely at the heart of this is the thinking that if we go to the Crystal, it will become, you know, the busy, bustling centre that City Hall is. We have to do everything to make that true. It is going to be the civic centre, the heart of London government, and to Ricardo's point, bringing those benefits to the Royal Docks. So, you know, I keep being asked, and I keep saying, you know, it will be the home of the mayor, it will be the home of the mayor's team. It will be where we hold all the public events and everything that we do now in different spaces, all that engagement that I know you all want with the public, all of that will continue to happen at the Crystal, should we go there. And, you know, you made that happen 20 years ago at City Hall. We would need to make it happen again at the Crystal. And so I don't think in that scenario that you would end up feeling isolated, because you'd be at the heart of it.
Okay. Can I ask, where will you be based?
Well, I'm going to hot desk across all three and at home. I'm planning to spend some time still at home, although like the rest of you, I'm getting a bit stir crazy. But no, I would be across what I would consider to be all four locations, one of them being at the desk I'm at now.
Obviously, if the move does happen, it's not going to be for another year, and hopefully we are out of the COVID phase, and we'll be able to meet in person. Have you given any thought as to the time or cost associated with GLA staff, whether it's deputy mayors, others that having to travel up and down to the Crystal from wherever they are to give evidence to us?
Well, we've absolutely taken it into account that that's what they'll have to do. That's what we'd all have had to have done today if you were doing that physically, and your many guests and witnesses and others would have to do. We have looked at the connections between Union Street, Palestra, and the Crystal in terms of public transport, and actually they are good, as we all know. It will have to be part of the life those of us subject to your scrutiny, need to take into account. And I would expect us all to plan our days and our weeks around, as we do now, the key things that we're expected at, and coming out to the Crystal, or indeed choosing to be based at the Crystal, will be part of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we're now in the final stretch. We've got a set of questions from Assembly Member Umesh Desai around security.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, if I could ask you this. Has there been any security risk assessment carried out on the Crystal, particularly with regard to, say, police response being required as a matter of urgency? And also bearing in mind anti-terrorism police guidelines to the public of, quote, run, hide, tell, unquote?
Yes, so Assemblymember Desai, as you would expect, all of the security issues associated with the Crystal are being considered very carefully by all the people you would expect us to be talking to.
Okay, fine. Well, Chair, at this stage I don't really have any follow-ups, unless other members wish to come in. But it's something perhaps we can keep an ongoing dialogue.
Yes, and maybe in private we could talk a bit more. Yes,
because the sensitivity has got to be confidential. I accept that as well.
Yes, be assured, all of that is being taken into account.
Thank you.
Colleagues, so I think in terms of, as we sum up these part of questions, unless there's something very urgent, I intend to allow members to submit written questions to the Secretariat, and we will pass those on if there's anything arising. I suspect once we see the transcripts, there may well be some further questions, Mary, to you and your team. So can I thank you for the way that you've answered our questions today, both you and your team. We note the correspondence between the Chair of the London Assembly and yourself as Chief Officer of the Great London Authority that's been appended to this report, and then delegate authority to me as Chair in conjunction with Party Group lead members and Caroline Pidgeon, MBE, AM, to agree any outputs from this discussion. Just a sec, can we leave that item? For the members present, look, their choice is, it's 2:10 now, some people have other meetings to go to. What I propose to do for the remaining items is that if we can delegate authority to me as Chair in consultation with Party Group leads and members, as well as Caroline Pidgeon, to agree to the outputs of these other items that we can do in written form, report those back formally in terms of actions taken by the committee. I'm looking for guidance from members, so can you either agree or dissent, and we can try and work out the issues.
Agree. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I then, therefore, with that being agreed, then declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much.
You, everybody.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.